Chapter 92. Misfortune. Until Jian Chun was completely full from the fresh blood of the silver-striped golden snake, unable to drink another drop of snake blood, he then finally stopped drinking. Jian Chun tilted his head backwards and let loose a comfortable sound, then gasped for air. Inside his body, the massive amount of energy from the snake blood had accumulates in his stomach. Finally it began to assimilate into his veins at an extremely slow speed, absorbed by the body. At the same time, on the left part of his body, including his shoulder where the venom was, the previously black skin color was rapidly fading, returning back to a normal skin color. Although the toxicity of the silver-striped golden snake's poison was incomparably strong, with only the snake's blood as the cure, this detoxifying process was also extremely fast. Not too long after, the poison inside Jian Chun's body was completely detoxified. Aside from the 2 initial bite marks left on his shoulder, the skin color of his body was back to normal. Seeing how his body was healthy once more, Jian Chun let out a sigh of relief. It was fortunate that in the very last moment when he was fighting the silver-striped golden snake, he had managed to successfully kill it. If not, even if he had had the light saint force to temporarily help him suppress the spread of the venom, he would not have been able to live past 3 days. After all, he was not able to maintain light saint force for a long period, since using his spirit consumed an extremely large amount of energy. Slowly standing on both feet, Jian Chun sized up the golden-colored snake that lay on the floor before him with no small amount of excitement. The silver-striped golden snake population didn't surpass 3 digits on the Tianyuan continent, so it could be said to be a very rare species. In addition, the body of the silver-striped golden snake was an extremely treasured commodity. This was no exaggeration. While the virulence of the poison was unmatched, its whole body was a treasure trove. It was said that the snake meat could not only help one improve their poison resistance, but also strengthen one's inner body. Although it would not be as monstrous as the defense of a silver-striped golden snake, it would still make one significantly stronger than before. And the gall of the silver-striped golden snake was said to be an extremely high-grade medicinal ingredient that could increase one's poison immunity if refined together with the blood of the silver-striped golden snake with a special method. It was even possible to create a body that was immune for thousands of different types of poison, unless the toxicity of the poison was stronger than that of a silver-striped golden snake, or another snake that was equally formidable. In all other cases, no poison under the heavens would pose a threat to the 10,000 immunity. The fangs of the silver-striped golden snake could also be synthesized into an extremely horrifying killing weapon. The fangs were constantly soaked from birth in the deadly venom day and night, to the point that the base quality of the fangs had slowly evolved. By this point, the venom had completely polluted the fangs, unable to be removed, and a single strike by those fangs would inject any enemy with the silver-striped golden snake's venom. If there was no silver-striped golden snake blood to act as an antidote, then the only outcome for one who was injected with the venom was death. This type of venom was capable of poisoning even Heaven Saint Masters. Of course, this specific silver-striped golden snake didn't have a strong enough venom to kill a Heaven Saint Master in a short moment, but it was strong enough that they would never be able to completely get rid of it. They would ultimately die from this venom if they didn't get the antidote, the snake's blood. Despite the venom being very strong, its toxicity was directly linked to the strength of the silver-striped golden snake. The stronger the snake was, the stronger its venom was. If a silver-striped golden snake were to reach the strength of a Class 6 magical beast, then its venom would definitely be capable of killing a Heaven Saint Master in a flash. The snake's skin was not only soft, but it was also extremely durable, making it an extremely valuable material in producing armor. This gave it an incredibly high value. And with regards to the venom sac, it was considered to be priceless. This venom, when refined correctly, would become an odorless and colorless type of poison that could bypass any type of poison detection or people's senses. With this poison, even Heaven Saint Masters would be hard-pressed to escape from death, since the only cure was the silver-striped golden snake's blood. The venom of the silver-striped golden snake appeared on the market several times. But every time it appeared, men with particularly special motives paid sky-high prices to purchase it. Silently remembering the information he had read about the various materials from the silver-striped golden snake in books, Jianchen couldn't help but feel excited. This was the biggest profit he had harvested since he entered the magical beast mountain range. Jianchen was especially tempted for the ability to be resistant to most poisons. Without any hesitation, Jianchen began to work on the silver-striped golden snake's body. When it came to this corpse, he was definitely not going to ignore it like he had with the other magical beasts. After expending a bit of energy, Jianchen finally dragged the rest of the snake's body out of the tall grass and piled it in one place. It wasn't until then that Jianchen had realized that this silver-striped golden snake was actually 70 meters long in length. The silver-striped golden snake's strength could be determined by how long it was. A Class 1 silver-striped golden snake was 20 meters at the very least. With every increase in class, it would grow 20 meters in length, all the way to a maximum of 100 meters long at Class 5. Any Class 6 silver-striped golden snake or higher would already be able to freely manipulate their body dimensions, so it was useless trying to rank one by its body length. Judging from the length of this snake, it looked as if it was on the verge of breaking through to the Class 4 rank. Jianchen retrieved the space ring on his neck given to him by his father when he had departed from the Changyang mansion. The space within the space ring was incomparably bigger compared to that of the space belt. If he wanted to bring this 70-meter-long snake away, the only possible solution was to use the space ring to store it. There was no way the space belt would be able to store the body within its tiny internal space. But if Jianchen wanted to store the 70-meter-long silver-striped golden snake within his space ring, it was not an easy task. Just as he was about to start, his face suddenly changed as he abruptly turned his head around. Where Jianchen was looking, he saw the shadows of some people from within the foliage walk out. Just as Jianchen spotted them, they discovered his existence at the same time. What terrible luck, Jianchen cursed, afraid that he was going to meet with some trouble. There was a total of 20 people who looked to be mercenaries from their outfit. The moment they saw Jianchen, the mercenaries all looked a bit dumbfounded. To have come across Jianchen, it was clear that this was unexpected. However, immediately after, their eyes were drawn to the coiled body of the silver-striped golden snake. Walking at the forefront of the other mercenaries was a middle-aged man that looked to be around 40 years old. After his gaze fell on the silver-striped golden snake, his brows slightly furrowed, revealing an expression deep in thought. Then, as if remembering something, his eyes flashed in realization. A look of extreme joy took over his entire face in an instant. As if he couldn't believe his eyes, he continued to focus on the snake's body behind Jianchen. He cried out, "Silver-striped golden snake. This is actually the silver-striped golden snake." The words of the mercenary caused every other mercenary behind him to be stunned, as if they had never heard of such a magical beast before. Not too long after, the memories they had regarding the silver-striped golden snake came back to them, causing their faces to change one by one. Looks of amazement and doubt filled their faces as they looked at the snake's corpse behind Jianchen and evaluated it. After closer inspection, more and more shouts of surprise that they were not able to repress rang through the air. So this is the silver-striped golden snake? This really is the silver-striped golden snake. It looks exactly how the rumors describe it. I didn't think we'd come across a silver-striped golden snake here. We're rich. Every kind of surprised comment came from the mouths of the mercenaries as their eyes began to heat up from looking at the silver-striped golden snake. The avarice of greed in their eyes was shown on their faces. They didn't try to hide it. Jianchen sighed to himself. He didn't think that such an unfortunate event would happen at such a crucial point. This was definitely the last thing he had wanted. It was a shame that fate didn't go as he had wished. Quickly hiding his space ring, the silver glow from his light wind sword appeared in his hand once more. Without any hesitation, he disappeared in a blur as he charged towards the group of mercenaries. The people in front of him had already recognized the silver-striped golden snake and its worth. There was no point in contemplating any further, since Jianchen knew that these mercenaries would try to take the body from him by any means necessary. There was definitely no room for negotiation. Jianchen crossed the 30 meters between them in a flash, the light wind sword immediately striking out. You came. Good. The middle-aged man, that was the leader, was not weak at all, and returned to his sense. A cold expression took over his previous joy as he stared at Jianchen, sneered, and summoned a great sword to his hand. With a single movement, he slashed at the charging Jianchen. Just as the middle-aged man's sword was about to hit Jianchen's trajectory suddenly changed. He dodged the sword and moved around the middle-aged man, attacking the group of mercenaries standing just behind the man. Chapter 93. Silencing by killing. Seeing Jianchen come at them at such a high speed, the mercenaries all came to their senses and summoned their saint weapons in preparation to attack him. Jianchen didn't want to be entangled with them, so instead of taking the blows head-on, he dodged their attacks and quickly moved to their sides. In an instant, his sword sliced through the necks of two mercenaries. As the silver light disappeared, the two mercenaries became rigid as the light in their eyes slowly faded away. From their necks, a slow trickle of blood started to flow out for everyone to see. In the next instant, the blood suddenly began to surge out from their wounds as the bodies slowly toppled to the ground. Without slowing down, Jianchen swept past the two dead bodies and charged at the hindmost mercenaries in the blink of an eye. These were the weakest of the group, and thus were Jianchen's first targets. Although there were around 20 mercenaries total, the majority of them were only saints and great saints. Only the first middle-aged man and one other were saint masters. Using the profound steps, Jianchen immediately flickered behind the group. His light wind sword flashed as mercenaries continued to fall to his blade. The mercenaries who were only saints were unable to do anything against such a fast attack. Since they were unable to react at all, there was no way they could possibly resist. In the time it took to take a breath, the mercenaries that were barely at the saint level had died by Jianchen's sword. The remaining people who were of the great saint level, or above, had already started to prepare themselves to defend against Jianchen. Even after killing all of the weak saints, Jianchen didn't pause at all. The light wind sword became a flash of silver lightning as he swung out at the one of the great saint mercenaries next to him. Seeing such a fast attack come at him, the mercenary's face immediately changed. Since there was no time to dodge, he could only desperately throw his battle axe up in front of him. But Jianchen's light wind sword was like a viper. With a single movement, its trajectory suddenly lowered and changed from aiming at the mercenary's throat to his heart. PFT. This time, the great saint mercenary wasn't able to react. The silver streak that was the light wind sword embedded itself deeply into the left side of the man's chest, piercing straight through his heart. Just as quickly as it entered, the sword was immediately pulled out of the man's chest. Jianchen then began to move on to fiercely attack the other mercenaries. Seeing their comrades die so quickly right in front of their eyes, the remaining mercenaries all cried out in both anger and shock. "Bastard, go die! Give back the lives of our comrades!" The remaining great saint mercenaries all rallied together and raised their saint weapons to attack Jianchen from various directions and seal off any possible escape routes Jianchen had. Jianchen let loose a subtle sneer before swinging his sword in a way that left a silver crescent trail behind. Like lightning, the sword pierced the other great saints. Ding! 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 In that short moment, Jianchen's sword had rapidly hit 3 of the mercenaries' saint weapons dead on. With each collision, a metallic sound rang out, but Jianchen had swung so fast, it was hard to differentiate separate weapons, as the sound was just like a single loud collisions. The moment the light wind sword made contact, a large amount of force was transmitted back through the mercenaries' saint weapons. Feeling the feedback transmitted back to them, the mercenaries' faces all changed. Unable to control their bodies, they were forced back a few steps. None of them had thought that such a slender sword would contain a power that was definitely not inferior to any others. The flash of light in that instant sparkled brightly with killing intent. Using the opportunity given by people suffering from temporary paralysis, Jian Chen approached the unmoving mercenary. The light wind sword became covered by a dense layer of sword qi, and it rapidly shot towards the mercenary's neck. Faced with such a fast sword, the mercenary hadn't managed to even regain his footing, couldn't put up any form of resistance at all. During his final moment, his expression of one of shock and anger at the sight of the light wind sword, having already deeply pierced through his throat. Fresh blood suddenly burst forth directly from the hole, completely covering Jian Chen, as the sword was completely pushed through the body and out of the wound. Right at this moment, a strong gale attacked Jian Chen from behind. Jian Chen's eyes flashed as he immediately pulled his sword out from the neck of the mercenary he just killed. Jian Chen turned around with his sword qi-enhanced light wind sword, and quickly thrusted his blade behind him like a flash of silver-white lightning. Clang! The 2-finger-wide swords clashed against the 3-inch-wide blade in midair. Neither saint weapon forced the other backwards, and the two were stuck in something like a stalemate. However, no one had noticed that the moment the swords had collided, Jian Chen's right arm had shaken twice afterwards. Jian Chen's eyes swiveled upwards to look at the owner of the great sword coldly. It was the middle-aged mercenary that had first spoken out before. The man was looking at him with an extremely overcast expression, but his eyes were filled with intense killing intent. "Ha!" The middle-aged man cried out angrily, the bloodlust flashing in his eyes. His left hand curled into a fist and shot it out toward Jian Chen, bringing a bitter cold wind along with it. Jian Chen's eyes flashed coldly as he sneered. Against the middle-aged man's strong fist, he wouldn't run. Instead, Jian Chen would raise his own fist without fear. Bang! The fists collided against each other with a loud bang. At the moment of contact, a powerful shock wave came out from between the two and affected everything in all directions. Under this almost invisible force of strength, the surrounding trees nearby the two combatants began to sway. Even some of the weeds nearby were immediately flattened to the ground. As for the two fighters, the force of their blows caused a powerful aftershock that forced the two to retreat a few steps. Finally, at a distance of 10 m, the warrior was swaying back and forth while waiting for the opponent. The middle-aged man looked at Jian Chen with an intense glare. "Youngster, you're quite fast. I'll take great pleasure in disposing of you." The remaining great saint mercenaries began to gather behind the middle-aged man. Each one of them snarled at Jian Chen with an angry look. Jian Chen stared coldly at the group of mercenaries without saying a word. Since the silver-striped golden snake was now discovered by them, Jian Chen had no other choice but to silence them. With the experiences from his previous world, Jian Chen wasn't some new inexperienced youth. He knew that if the news about the silver-striped golden snake were to leak out, then it would bring him an endless amount of trouble, since the snake was a very precious source of profit. Many of the major wealthy clans would go to war in order to obtain the silver-striped golden snake. If he were to come across those clans, it would be even worse than his current troubles with the Huayan sect. So this was something that Jian Chen wanted to avoid at all costs. Thus, with this chance, Jian Chen definitely wanted to kill the mercenaries here to stop the rumors before they started. There were only 11 mercenaries left in the group aside from the middle-aged Saint Master. Another man that looked to be 30 years old had also possessed near Saint Master strength. Amongst this mercenary group, it was only that 30-year-old man and middle-aged man that could give threaten Jian Chen. Seeing that Jian Chen wasn't talking, the middle-aged man spoke out loud. "My fellow brothers, attack with me. If we kill him, not only will our dead comrades be avenged, but that silver-striped golden snake will be ours. If we can take that silver-striped golden snake, then we will no longer have to risk our lives in the magical beast mountain range in order to earn a profit." With that, the middle-aged man charged towards Jian Chen, with the rest of the mercenaries following right behind him. Jian Chen still didn't say anything, but the fighting spirit within his heart had unconsciously reached a high point. Raising the light wind sword, Jian Chen activated his profound steps and flew towards the group of mercenaries. "Ha!" Seeing the charging Jian Chen, the middle-aged man's eyes revealed the killing intent within them. He brought his great sword high up into the air to prepare for splitting Jian Chen's head in two later. Jian Chen sneered once more. He had no wish to meet with the middle-aged man. Altering his path, he slid by the man and continued onwards to fight the weaker mercenaries. But the middle-aged man had already taken a loss before from the very same tactics. He could only see the great sword suddenly change angles in midair, as the path was changed with only brute force. Afterwards, the great sword followed behind Jian Chun, swept past his shadow, then continued to slash horizontally toward Jian Chun. The great sword was definitely fast as well. As it traveled towards Jian Chun's back, it carried about a strong gust of wind that immediately cut into Jian Chun's waist without obstruction. However, there were no signs of a smile on the middle-aged man's face. Instead, his gaze hardened as he realized Jian Chun's body gradually disappeared. Mirror image, he growled. Chapter 94. Annihilating everyone. Highlight above for chapter title: Avoiding the middle-aged man's great sword. Jian Chun appeared in front of the other mercenaries with his light wind sword, stabbing out multiple times in unbroken succession. At the same time, the mercenaries raised their saint weapons one after another to swing at him. Ding ding ding. The noise of many weapons colliding could be heard. In a brief moment, Jian Chun used an unimaginably fast speed to slash out dozens of times, causing the saint weapons that the mercenaries attacked him with to deviate from their original trajectories. Afterwards, Jian Chun's actions contained no hesitation, as the light wind sword in his hand emitted an indistinct sword glow. Taking advantage of the moment where the mercenaries were trying to bring their saint weapons in their hands back under control, the light wind sword once again transformed into dozens of silvery white flashes that pierced outwards. PF, PF, PF. In that short moment, Jian Chun's light wind sword stabbed out 3 times, each one accurately hitting the throats of 3 different mercenaries. Their bodies went rigid immediately as their throats started to leak blood, dyeing their necks red. Slowly their bodies fell to the ground. At that moment, a sharp sound carrying a strong amount of power pierced the air, whooshing in from the side. Sensing this strength that suddenly appeared out of nowhere, Jian Chun immediately turned around and shifted toward the side by 2 meters. But before Jian Chun could get to the side safely, another surge of wind came at Jian Chun and arrived right in front of him in a blink of an eye. Jian Chun's face didn't change at all, as he brought his light wind sword to block the frontal attack. Clang! A huge sword heavily smashed against Jian Chun's light wind sword, causing Jian Chun to fly back uncontrollably by quite a few meters. Whoosh! As Jian Chun flew through the air, a long silver spear chased after Jian Chun's heart with an ear-piercing whistle. Sensing that the silver spear had a great amount of saint force within it, Jian Chun grew solemn as he saw the second saint master had finally taken action. Jian Chun stamped down onto the ground fiercely, leaving a deep footprint as he forcibly stopped his body from continuously retreating backwards. His right hand shook as his light wind sword slashed at the spear in front of him without fear. Ding! The tips of the light wind sword and spear collided into each other in midair. Seeing this, Jian Chun's eyes flashed coldly as an intense amount of sword chi escaped from his sword. It transmitted through the spear toward the 30-year-old man. Catching on to what Jian Chun was planning, the 30-year-old man sneered. Following after, an enormous amount of saint force came flooding out from his body, coursing along the spear toward the light wind sword. It stopped Jian Chun's sword chi in the spear from moving any closer. Immediately afterwards, the sword chi momentarily stopped advancing forward, due to the collision with the flood of saint force that moved like a galloping wild horse. This weakened its advancing speed. Jian Chun's eyes flashed dangerously as he began to increase the amount of energy to fight against the man. Immediately, an intense amount of sword chi surged outwards, smashing against the saint force of the other man without fear. Bang! As Jian Chun's unique sword chi made contact with the other mercenary's saint force, a loud explosion was heard. The energy from the contact exploded outwards, with the colliding saint weapons as the epicenter. The shock wave caused the 2 fighters to be blown backwards. With each step they traveled, the mercenary left a deep footprint from stepping heavily on the ground. However, Jian Chun's body looked incomparably nimble. As his toes lightly made contact with the ground, he swayed momentarily before quickly shaking off that backwards momentum. However, just as Jian Chun stabilized his body, A fierce force came from behind him and approached his body in a blink of an eye. Jian Chen's face changed slightly. Just from his recent encounter against that mercenary, he had used up a lot of energy. At the moment, he was lacking some strength and was unable to gather enough Saint force to resist the incredibly strong Saint Master's attack from behind him. In a moment of desperation, Jian Chen rolled to the ground to evade. But even so, the great sword had landed a wound on his back, so deep that even the bone could be seen. Seeing that he now had the upper hand, he raised his sword mercilessly once more to slash at Jian Chen. Feeling a burning sharp sensation in his back, Jian Chen bit his lip as his left hand hit the floor. His entire body immediately flew upwards. Then his body slightly twisted to the side, barely dodging the second sword stroke from the man by a hair. However, his light wind sword flashed like a bolt of lightning as it pierced towards the older mercenary at an extremely fast speed. The older man was alarmed. Since he had just swung his saint weapon, it was far too late for him to pull it back and defend himself. Forced by the desperate situation, the man tilted his head narrowly to dodge the sword piercing towards his throat. However, despite managing to dodge the fatal blow, the sword had still left a small nick on his neck that dripped with blood. With a grim smile, Jian Chen twisted his wrist to allow his light wind sword to chase after the other man's neck once more, before the man could even react. Immediately after the silver light wind sword flashed across the man's neck, his face became rigid as blood began to pulsate out of his neck in small waves. "Why you?" The man's eyes opened wide as he looked at Jian Chen in disbelief. He strained to lift his hand, fingers slowly shaking as it pointed at Jian Chen. It seemed as if he wanted to say something, but the wound on his neck prevented him from doing so. In the end, the man wordlessly collapsed on the ground. Seeing the dead man, the remaining mercenaries could only be extremely shocked. They began to look at Jian Chen with expressions of extreme dread. Upon killing the middle-aged man, Jian Chen didn't leave any time for the other mercenaries to catch their breaths. With his light wind sword, he began to run towards the remaining people. Seeing Jian Chen approach, the single remaining Saint Master mercenary moved forward to block him. With a thrust, his long spear immediately disappeared and reappeared in a blur towards Jian Chen. The other great Saint mercenaries had been intimidated by the death of the middle-aged Saint Master, and were afraid of charging forward. The idea of retreating had already been planted within their hearts. If not for the other Saint Master level mercenary, then they would had already long since run away. Ding ding ding. A series of colliding sounds sung throughout the forest as Jian Chen and the 30-year-old mercenary exchanged a dozen blows at a lightning-fast speed in a brief moment. Now that there were no outside factors, Jian Chen's sword chi had swiftly helped him take the advantage and completely suppressed the other person. In the blink of an eye, the youth was forced onto the defensive. Because Jian Chen's swordplay was far too fast, the 30-year-old mercenary didn't dare attack. Instead, he continued defending himself, reacting to Jian Chen's movements. He was afraid that if he were to try to attack, then Jian Chen would be able to swiftly use that moment to kill him before the man could even complete the attack. Not only that, but Jian Chen was fighting him at close range. The 30-year-old mercenary wasn't able to show off the true power of his long spear at such a short distance, so he was left with the feeling of having one arm tied behind his back. After attaining the Great Saint level, Jian Chen's battle strength had improved several times over. So with his current strength, he could contend against those a level higher than him on equal footing. After a dozen high-speed blows were exchanged, the two were finally split apart. However, the 30-year-old man looked to be in a sorry state, as his clothes were completely ruined by this point. A few parts of his body had deep-looking wounds, and even his neck had a thin line from where Jian Chen had only barely cut apart the first layer of skin. As for Jian Chen, besides the single wound on his back, he didn't look very different. The only change was that his face had grown paler. Staring at Jian Chen with a hardened face, the 30-year-old mercenary said, "The enemy is far too strong. I'll stall him while everyone else runs away." After fighting Jian Chen, the 30-year-old mercenary knew how fast and strong Jian Chen was. In the mercenary's heart, He knew that it was possible he wouldn't be leaving here alive, so he had to take the worst plan of action for himself. He had realized another thing in his heart regarding the situation with the silver-striped golden snake. For the sake of keeping this matter a secret, Jian Chun would definitely kill anyone that tried to leave this place. He wouldn't let anyone spread details about the situation. If it was the mercenary who was in this situation, he would have done the same thing. This was the rule for survival for the Tianyuan continent. Everything was decided by the fist. Whoever was strongest would have the last laugh. Hearing these words, the remaining mercenaries all started a bit before immediately running away from the area in all directions. Seeing every mercenary scamper away, Jian Chun's face darkened. He slashed his sword to try to kill the man quickly. The 30-year-old mercenary let loose a battle cry as he moved towards Jian Chun without fear. Because of the speed Jian Chun demonstrated, the man knew that it was unlikely that he would be leaving here alive. Rather than dying with everyone else, he had decided that it was better to use his life to garner some time for everyone else. Once the news of the silver-striped golden snake was leaked out, there would be no shortage of people to avenge him. Ding! The light wind sword collided with the long spear once again, causing sparks to fly out between the two. Then, under the 30-year-old mercenary's control, the sword was flipped on top of the spear and was immediately sent flying into the air as he performed a move on instinct. At this, the man looked on with shock. However, a joyous look soon appeared on his face as he immediately manipulated the spear to stab straight towards Jian Chun's throat. Jian Chun smiled in disdain as his palms suddenly filled with very strong saint force. Both palms disappeared into a blur, and his hands blurred as they shot out to grab onto the spear shaft tightly. At the same time, the light wind sword that had been knocked into the air suddenly stopped, as it began to pulse out a shroud of sword chi that enveloped the sword. With a large glow, the light wind sword traveled through the air quickly, like a flash of light, appearing as if it could cut open a space in the air. With an ear-piercing whistle, the sword bore through the man's throat, disappearing into the nearby forest area. Suddenly, the loud cries of a few people could be heard from within the forests. The soul sword was Jian Chun's last resort. Until it was the final moment, Jian Chun would not use it easily. Chapter 95. Pitiful prophet using the soul sword. Jian Chun had caught the Saint Master off guard and killed him. The other mercenaries who had run off in all directions to escape had fallen one after another to Jian Chun's sword. The silver glow from the sword flashed as it shot towards Jian Chun. Holding his hand into the air, the sword immediately returned to its rightful place in his hands. As it smacked into his palms, a fierce amount of sword chi briefly shot out from the sword. A few moments after the light wind sword returned to Jian Chun, the intense atmosphere coming from the sword suddenly disappeared without a trace. Soon after, the light wind sword also slowly disappeared. Jian Chun let out a long breath of air. He had already fought 2 battles in a row. This wasn't an easy feat to do. After killing the silver-striped golden snake, and then killing the 2 Saint Master mercenaries, Jian Chun's internal saint force was all but gone. If it wasn't for the fact that his azulate sword law was a unique technique, his saint force would not have gained so many mystical effects. Without it, Jian Chun would have been unable to kill the silver-striped golden snake, let alone fight another battle after it. Jian Chun shifted his body. Just as he began to move, the wound on his back immediately seared with hot pain. The muscles on Jian Chun's face twitched a few times due to the strong feeling of pain. This really hurts, Jian Chun hissed under his breath. Wanting to move, his powerful soul gathered a large amount of the light saint force from the world essence towards him. Slowly, a large indistinct white ball of light that had appeared around him began to slowly turn milky white. Although the light was dazzling, it was extremely warm and did not hurt the eyes at all. Bathing in the glow of the milky white light, Jian Chun's figure became so indistinct within the glow that it was hard to see him. Even the deep cut on his back was quickly healing itself under the energy of the light saint force. Under this light saint force, a comfortable and refreshing feeling spontaneously arose from his chest and quickly spread throughout his entire body. It bypassed Jian Chun's self-control and he could barely hold himself back from. Although he had already used the light saint force before while trying to resist the silver-striped golden snake's venom, his attention had been stretched thinly at that time, so he hadn't noticed the feeling of happiness the light saint force had brought to him. But now that he could fully focus, Jianchen finally realized how much of a pleasure the light saint force could give. The light saint force continued on for a while before gradually disappearing, showing Jianchen's body once more. Jianchen twisted his arm behind his back to feel the wound that was previously there, but he could only feel smooth skin. Although the shirt he was wearing was moist with blood, he didn't feel any type of pain, and not a hint of a scar could be found. Nodding his head in satisfaction, Jianchen began to smile at the miraculous results the light saint force had shown. With a skill like this, Jianchen's ability to save his own life would be even more bountiful on the Tianyuan continent from now on. Just then, a dizzy sensation struck Jianchen as the world seemed to sway twice for him. The dizzy spell was over in a moment only to be replaced with a wave of exhaustion. At that moment, Jianchen felt that he had not slept for a whole day and night, and was in a very serious state of weariness. Jianchen wanted to just find a bed and sleep in it right then. What a pity, the soul sword and the light saint force brings about such a high energy consumption. Right now my soul is evidently all used up. Jianchen gloomily sighed to himself. He knew that in the future, he would have to refrain from using the soul sword and light saint force too much. Otherwise, if he ran out of soul in the future, it would majorly affect his fighting strength. Fortunately, while his soul was for the most part exhausted, it was not at a critical point yet, so his fighting strength was not impacted by that much. Taking out an intact set of clothes from within his space belt, Jianchen looked at the few mercenaries on the ground. Looking at the space belts on their waists, anticipation flashed through Jianchen's eyes. I hope there's a few good things in them, Jianchen thought to himself. On the Tianyuan continent, a majority of people generally put all of their valuables within their space belts. It could be said that a single space belt could contain a person's life savings. Of course, many weaker mercenaries were very poor, and so they wouldn't have much in their space belts. Walking past the mercenaries without touching their space belts, Jianchen quickly walked up to the silver-striped golden snake and put it in his space ring. Since the silver-striped golden snake was huge, it had taken Jianchen the same amount of time it took for a candle wick to burn to store the snake in the space ring. Placing the space ring within the folds of his inner robes once more, Jianchen let loose a breath in relaxation as an inconcealable feeling of joy took hold. An unpoisonable body, recollections of the good benefits of the 10,000 immunity came flashing back into Jianchen's head. Right now, he had the body of the silver-striped golden snake, and although he had swallowed a good amount of the snake's blood, the rest of it was still within the body of the snake. It could be said that given enough time, Jianchen could take the silver-striped golden snake's blood and gallbladder and refine them to gain an unpoisonable body. Slowly calming down his heart, Jianchen walked towards the bodies of the mercenaries once more and removed their space belts. Making sure they didn't have any additional items, he departed from the area and disappeared into the forest. Once Jianchen was far enough, he found an empty spot to sit down with his legs crossed. He then took out the 20 space belts and began to look through them. The items within the space belts were numerous. A good majority of them were essentials that were needed to survive within the Tianyuan continent. Comforters, tents, food and water accounted for half of the items, while the rest were all items of little worth. There were pitiful amounts of silver and copper coins stacked on top of each other within the space belts. But Jianchen did not feel inclined to take such a trifle amount. After going through quite a few of the space belts, Jianchen still couldn't find any items of value. The space belts only had items for everyday use like bandages and herbs. There wasn't even a single Class 1 monster core to be seen. Jianchen didn't have a surprised look on his face, since he knew that these mercenaries were here in the magical Beast Mountain range to earn a profit in the first place. To be trying to earn money in such a place could only mean that they were poor. The most valuable items they could possibly have would be a few low-leveled monster cores. After going through half of the space belts, Jianchen finally found one that had a small pile of around a dozen monster cores, but they were all pretty much Class 1 or Class 2. Taking the monster cores from the space belt, Jianchen continued to look through the rest of the space belts. Quickly, Jianchen had finished looking through the 20 space belts and casually tossed them to the side. Turning his head back to look at the small pile of monster cores and money, Jianchen couldn't help but have a look of helplessness. From the 20 space belts, he had only collected around 20 monster cores and almost 100 gold coins. Among those 20 monster cores, there was a single Class 3 monster core, 6 Class 2 monster cores, and the rest were only Class 1 monster cores. Not knowing if he should laugh or cry, Jianchen shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Isn't this profit way too low? There were 2 Saint Masters within the group, and yet they still have only this pitiful amount of monster cores. I could get more by myself in a single day." Storing the gold coins and monster cores within his own space belt, Jianchen left the area. The following day, Jianchen drifted through the depths of the magical beast forest. However, after being chased by the silver-striped golden snake, he was already very close to the abyss of the magical beast mountain range. The majority of the magical beasts here would be at the Class 3 level, and a very few of them would be at the Class 2 level. Compared to the Great Saint level Jianchen, Class 3 magical beasts were no longer as much of a threat as they once were. Although it took some more effort to kill them, the profits here would be greater, since there were more Class 3 magical beasts than Class 2 magical beasts. A single Class 3 monster core had the same amount of energy as 10 Class 2 monster cores, and even the purity of the energy within the core was better than the Class 2 monster core. They were necessary for Jianchen to use to cultivate, as 3 Class 3 monster cores would most likely take him the entire night with his terribly fast rate of consumption. In the blink of an eye, Jianchen had spent another 10 days in the forest, where he hunted for magical beasts in the day and cultivated in isolation at night. After those 10 days, Jianchen's strength had improved by leaps and bounds. Although he was still at the primary Great Saint level, he could clearly sense that he was not all that far away from the middle Great Saint level. During these 10 days, Jianchen would spend each day walking through the mountains carefully with one of the Class 3 monster cores in hand. At one point, Jianchen had come across a Class 4 magical beast, but it was far too strong for him to fight against. After a dozen blows, Jianchen had escaped while suffering from a serious injury. From that point on, Jianchen had recognized the strength of a Class 4 magical beast, so he continued to fight against Class 3 magical beasts instead. Afterwards, whenever he encountered a Class 4 magical beast, he would just run away immediately without provoking it. Chapter 96. A lucky encounter with a woman by the river. Highlight above for chapter title. Over the course of those 10 days, Jianchen had hunted many Class 3 magical beasts. Although there weren't as many beasts as when he had hunted in Kargath Forest, the profits he had received were still high. He had about 20 Class 3 monster cores, which was only a little bit more than how many Class 2 monster cores he had. Considering how fast he had initially cultivated the 3 Class 3 monster cores from before, he would probably finish cultivating the rest of the cores in around 7 days. What Jianchen didn't know, however, was that since he was traveling alone in the magical beast mountain range, magical beasts would come upon him more frequently than if he was in a large group of mercenaries. This was because many magical beasts on the mountain range had an extremely sensitive sense of smell and high vigilance. Since they had lived their entire lives on the mountain range, their ability to track footprints was remarkable, and so if they had come across a strong group with many footprints, then the magical beasts would carefully run far away from them. So although the magical beasts did not have any intellect, their own survival had ingrained themselves deep within their minds. But if they were to come across a weak or single person that they were sure they could kill and eat, then the previously hiding magical beasts would come out and search for that person. They wouldn't need to use an extraordinary amount of energy to chase after and hunt their prey. So since Jianchen was by himself in this place, the chance of encountering a magical beast was greatly increased. If it wasn't for the fact that Jianchen's spirit was strong enough to detect movements around him, he would have been beaten black and blue by the sneak attacks from some magical beasts. The next day, the cross-legged Jianshan finally opened his eyes as he awoke from his cultivation on top of a tree branch and jumped down onto the ground. Dusting himself off, he took a look at the monster cores he had stored within his space belt. During this short amount of time, he had collected a decent amount of monster cores. And even though he had used many cores to cultivate, his space ring still had plenty of cores in stock. There are still 50 Class 2 monster cores and 120 Class 3 monster cores. Checking the inventory within the space belt, Jianshan nodded his head in satisfaction. Currently he was using 20 Class 2 monster cores to cultivate with per night, and his space belt only had enough for 2 days' worth of cultivation at most. All of the other monster cores added together would last for over 10 days. I still have 2 Class 4 monster cores. One is from the prize given by Kargath Academy, and another is what father gave to me. Since the Class 4 monster core has way more energy inside it than a Class 3 monster core has, I don't know how long a single Class 4 monster core will last me, Jianshan thought. He didn't realize that the amount of monster cores within his possession was considered a massive pile of wealth. To Jianshan, it was just a way to sustain his cultivation for a mere 10 days. Looking up at the bright sun overhead, he immediately discerned his location and began to walk off towards the outskirts of the magical beast mountain range, without even stopping to eat breakfast. By this point, the amount of time Jianshan had spent in the mountain range was quite long. The monster cores in his space ring were more than enough for him to cultivate with for a few days, but the supplies he had on hand were about to run out. So for that reason, Jianshan needed to return to Wake City to replenish his supplies. Not only that, but he also needed to handle the silver-striped golden snake within his space ring. Otherwise, if left alone long enough, who knew what type of situation would occur? For example, the body might rot away. Jianshan wasn't too sure about such things, since he hadn't read about them in the books. So for the sake of achieving his goal, Jianshan wanted to get the silver-striped golden snake matter over with as soon as possible. Throughout the mountain range was the scent of bloodshed, something magical beasts were especially sensitive to. It would be incredibly unwise if he were to keep the body of the silver-striped golden snake here. So Jianshan decided to take it back to Wake City and plan from there. The magical beast mountain range had plenty of dense tall grass, and just as many swamps. It was hard to detect them just by looking, but as Jianshan traveled on the road, he kept an eye out everywhere. During the past days he had spent in the mountain range, he had already sunk into the swamps a few times before ultimately escaping from them. Under the guidance of the blazing sun, Jianshan managed to leave the magical beast mountain range, without deviating from the path too much. After walking for 2 days, he finally exited the depths of the mountain range and entered the flat lands of the forest. Within those 2 days, Jianshan's space belt had gained even more Class 2 monster cores. Taking in a deep breath of the fresh air within the forest, Jianshan tilted his head to look at the clothes he had fashioned from animal hides with a grim smile. With his current appearance, he looked like a beggar. It was a shame that there wasn't much water within the mountain range, making it impossible for Jianshan to wash the stink off of himself. Jianshan hadn't forgotten about the river at the outskirts of the forest. Throwing off his animal hide clothes, he leapt into the depths of the water and began to cleanse himself of the grime he had collected. The amount of body odor and dirt he had amassed over the past days had already covered his body like armor, making him feel sick every time he moved. He wasn't comfortable at all with the sticky yet greasy feeling on his skin, but he had felt restraint while in the magical beast mountain range. Yet as soon as the river came into view, he had immediately thrown off that restraint and leapt into the water. Jianshan wrapped the space belt around his neck as he began to knead at his entire body. His arms continued to rub everywhere as the water nearby him began to turn black with contamination. Even after washing himself in the river, he didn't leave the waters. Instead, he floated on his back and slowly closed his eyes, allowing the river to wash over him. For the first time in a long time, his mind was at rest as he relaxed under the pleasure of the icy cold waters. The past few days had been taxing on his mind as he traveled within the mountain range. Now that his mind was at rest, the very depths of his soul felt free, letting Jianchen finally sleep in peace. Jianchen closed his eyes as he laid back in the water and took a gentle bath from the cold water from the river and the warm rays from the sun. His naked body bobbed up and down the river as he floated along with the waves. As the river flowed, he began to float towards the direction of Wake City, letting Jianchen have a free ride for a while. So while he was traveling for free, he could take in a bit of enjoyment from the ride. After a while, Jianchen completely lost track of time. He didn't know how long it had been since he was traveling down the river. But at that moment, Jianchen's head bumped into something soft. The moment he felt contact, Jianchen was brought back to awareness and focused on whatever he had hit. Whatever he had hit, it was moving. An animal, Jianchen thought in his drowsy state of mind. In an instant, he sobered up and reactivated his spirit to an active level. The surrounding environment became known to Jianchen as he instantly changed from sluggish state to his concentrated state. His previously closed eyes snapped wide open to reveal his bright eyes. Immediately, he flipped his body over from his laid-back position to be on his legs. The water rose to his waist, leaving only the top half of his body above the water. As he completed that action, the face of a person came into view. It was the face of a woman that could cause a city to fight over her, and could even be considered to be a snowy white face of perfection. The 5 facial features on her face were perfectly matched up to the point that even a picky person wouldn't be able to find a fault within them. She was like a fairy that had descended onto the mortal world. The woman did not look all that old, roughly around years old. Within her sparkling white eyes were beautiful and dark pupils. She sluggishly stared back at Jianchen's eyes. Below, her considerably big were exposed to the air, and were only separated from Jianchen by a narrow margin. What terrible luck! To think that there was a woman taking a bath here. Jianchen thought immediately as his face began to darken. Thanks to his previous experiences, he knew just what was happening here. He didn't think that while drifting away on the river to relax after wandering the magical Beast Mountain range, he would stumble across a woman bathing in the very same river he was in. Just as Jianchen realized what was happening, the small eyes of the woman in front of him opened wide, as she too realized what had just happened, and a scream came out of her mouth. "You stinking scoundrel!" Her previously sluggish eyes turned red-hot with anger and shame as she screamed, and swung her arm rapidly at Jianchen's chest. Bang! Before Jianchen could even react, the woman's palm had already hit his chest with a muffled sound. Jianchen was then sent flying backwards over the waters, as a small stream of blood came pouring out of his mouth. Chapter 97. Mysterious Old Man. Highlight above for title. The palm sent Jianchen flying backwards into the air by 20 meters before sinking back down into the river. A look of astonishment flashed through Jianchen's eyes as he felt the strong energy from her hand. That single strike had caused a decent injury on him, as the bones where she had hit started to hurt, as if something heavy had smashed into it. Jianchen's arm paddled through the water briefly, before he leapt into the forests on the opposite side of the river. Hiding behind a broad tree, he used his Saint Force to evaporate the water droplets on him, before taking the space ring from his necklace. With a simple motion, he pulled out the last intact piece of clothing and put it on. Just as Jianchen put on his robes, his already pale face froze momentarily before leaping towards the side in a hurry. Bang! Just as Jianchen dodged to the side, the tree he had previously been hiding in exploded into splinters, as a tremendous amount of pure Saint Force exploded on over. As it landed where Jianchen was once at, the dirt around it was sent flying as a huge crater was left behind in the impact zone. "You scoundrel, to think that you would peek at me taking a bath. I will definitely kill you." There was a small mournful tone mixed in within her angry words, as her face grew redder by the second in front of Jianchen. Her jade-like white hands carried a blue-colored Saint Force before flying at Jianchen so fast that it whistled through the air. Feeling the huge amount of Saint Force within her palm, Jianchen's face changed rapidly and became abnormally solemn. Gathering up the Saint Force within himself, he concentrated it in his right hand and lashed out. Bang! The two palms collided against each other with a muffled explosion, as the shockwave flew out in all directions. Jian Chun was sent flying backwards violently, crashing through various bushes before finally slumping to the ground. PFF. A mouthful of blood splashed out from Jian Chun's mouth and formed a small bloody mist for a brief moment. As it escaped from his mouth, his face grew deathly pale. With difficulty, Jian Chun tilted his head upwards in disbelief at the woman in front of him. She wasn't too far away from Jian Chun's age, and yet she had such an unbelievably strong amount of strength. He had estimated that she possessed great Saint Master strength at the very least. This was deduced by the fact that Jian Chun knew his own strength like the back of his hand, especially after fighting against Saint Masters while in the magical Beast Mountain range. With his current strength, even Saint Masters wouldn't be able to contend against him. So the woman right in front of him was an unbelievably strong opponent that he wasn't able to defeat with ease with his current strength. Great Saint Master. Jian Chun swallowed nervously. To think that the woman in front of him was actually that strong, Jian Chun couldn't believe it. In Kargath Academy, where every single gifted individual of Jesson Kingdom was gathered, there were still quite a number of young women of the same age as the woman in front of him that weren't even able to condense the saint weapon to promote into the saint level. The woman slowly walked towards Jian Chun with the beauty of an immortal that could almost be said to be unmatched within the world. Her beautiful eyes were filled with shame and indignation, her fury slowly tearing away her charm. Covered with a strong killing intent as she gave the death glare towards Jian Chun, it looked as if she had wanted nothing more but to make mincemeat out of him. The woman wore a pink leather robe that was rather messy. It was clear to see that she had thrown it on quickly without sparing enough time to smooth herself out. Her long hair was draped behind her shoulder and clung to her waist as water droplets slowly made contact with her robes. With her pink slippers that made no sound as she walked, the lady walked towards Jian Chun slowly with a blue-colored sword in hand. Seeing the sword with such a color, Jian Chun's face changed. With difficulty, Jian Chun slowly crawled up from the ground as his right hand began to tremble. The woman was surely very strong. In a single blow, Jian Chun's right arm had already suffered from such a critical blow. Controlling the light saint force within the air, Jian Chun had made sure that the healing effects of the light saint force couldn't be seen by his opponent first. When it came to the special attribute that was the light saint force, he did not want anyone to know about the milky white glow or healing abilities. Hold on, miss. This was just a misunderstanding. I had no intentions on peeking on the miss taking a bath. Jian Chun laughed. The power of the lady's strength had amazed him. You scoundrel, just shut up for me. The woman's beautiful face turned ashen as she heard Jian Chun. It was clear to see that she was not feeling better, and so with a single stride, her pink shoe lashed out at Jian Chun's groin. Jian Chun's body swayed to the side by this, and dodged it by a narrow margin. Soon after that moment, she turned around and chopped at Jian Chun with her blue-colored sword. The blue sword was traveling fast, and in a blink of an eye, it was already by Jian Chun's figure. Seeing this, Jian Chun began to turn around, but despite this, there was still a large sword wound that appeared on Jian Chun's chest. Blood began to fly out like a fountain as it flowed from his body violently. In a flash, Jian Chun's newest pair of clothing had been dyed red with blood. Unable to realize he was cut, a burning sensation began to swell up within Jian Chun as he realized there was pain happening. Quickly, he began to gain some distance from her, while letting the slender form of the light wind sword appear within his hand. Although Jian Chun had chanced upon the sight of her naked body, this was not on purpose. He had already apologized 3 or 4 times, but the lady was still so angry and calling for his death. This brought about no small amount of anger from her. The young woman did not plan on letting Jian Chun go at all, and chased after him. Her blue sword carried a type of saint force that seemed to sound like waves as it slashed towards Jian Chun. Jian Chun let loose a groan as his eyes flashed with an icy cold glare. Despite the lady being stronger, he wasn't the type of person to sit around and wait to be captured. With the wave of his hand, the light wind sword sprung into action. In a streak of silver, the sword attacked at the throat of the would-be murderer. The sword was already going as fast as it possibly could, but the strength of his opponent wasn't so great that he would not dare try to block the attack. He would do whatever it takes to win. Even if his opponent was a girl, Jianchen didn't hesitate at all. Just as the blue sword was about to make contact with Jianchen again, he twisted his body and caused the sword to narrowly scrape against his armpit. Jianchen, on the other hand, already had his sword pointed at her throat. At that moment, the lady let loose an expression full of panic as she gave a small shout. Immediately turning his neck, she had dodged Jianchen's stab at her throat. But despite all that, there was a thin line of blood that leaked out from the small wound the sword had made. Feeling a small pain in her neck, the lady had a small expression of panic as her beautiful eyes finally began to reveal the tiniest amount of fear. Seeing this, Jianchen began to smile inwardly. Although the woman was strong, she did not have enough combat experience, so in this fight, she was at a disadvantage. However, Jianchen didn't plan on letting the woman go either. Feeling the sharp burning pain inflicted onto him by her, Jianchen's light wind sword became indistinct as it chased after the woman. The woman's face grew even more panicked as the light wind sword began to pierce through her body. Suddenly, the woman's body suddenly disappeared from Jianchen's line of sight, before reappearing 10 meters away for some strange reason, as if it was some sort of magic trick. Jianchen's heart trembled as he watched the girl reappear 10 meters away from him. But when he saw that the girl's face was paling, it looked like it had taken a great amount of energy to use such a fast movement technique. Could it be this is a special type of battle skill? Jianchen thought. You scoundrel! To think you would raise your hand against a woman. This one will not let you go. To be put in such a state by a weaker person, the girl was furious. After yelling at Jianchen, the blue-colored sword in her hand began to glow brighter as all of the saint force within her surged out and pulsed around the sword. The woman raised her sword and yelled, "First form of the Imperial Water Arts, Water Dragon Strike." As she spoke, the concentrated amount of saint force within her sword took on the form of a dragon almost instantaneously, before breaking away from the sword and charged at Jianchen. Jianchen's face changed the very moment he saw the blurry form of the dragon come out from the sword. When the dragon came into view, Jianchen had felt a strong sense of pressure, making him feel like he was carrying a 1,000-pound rock on his back. Just breathing was already a heavy task, let alone dodging. His face changed even more drastically as he realized his current situation. The only way to defend himself against this water dragon was to dodge, but he was incapable of doing so. He knew that the amount of saint force within the water dragon was strong enough that he wouldn't be able to take it without it inflicting serious damage. Such a threatening person, don't blame me if I treat you badly. Jianchen's eyes glinted dangerously as sword chi began to swirl around his sword once more. Once fully enveloped, the sword lifted off from Jianchen's hands and shot towards the woman at such a speed that even the naked eye would have difficulty spotting it. When the woman saw the sword coming at her, the wound on her neck began to sting faintly. The lady grew pale with fright. The secret technique she had used to dodge Jianchen's blow earlier had taken up a lot of energy, as well as with the water dragon. Right now her internal saint force was practically empty, so she wasn't able to dodge the sword. Desperately, she commanded the water dragon to come back and block the incoming sword. Immediately, the water dragon turned around and chased after the light wind sword. Opening up its giant jaw, it snapped at the light wind sword. However, the light wind sword was incomparably faster than the dragon. As the jaws of the water dragon snapped shut, it only tasted air as the sword was now just a meter away from the lady's neck. Outrageous, to have the audacity to raise a hand against the young miss. At this critical moment, a furious aged man came flying from the skies, shouting in a loud tone that echoed throughout the area. The figure of a large man flew out and stood in front of the woman, blocking the light wind sword. This was an elderly man around the age of, with a large build that seemed to have a height of 2 meters tall. He wore a white robe that had his hair trailing behind him with a jade ring holding it in place. His sharp eyes with matching white eyebrows had made him look like a very sharp individual. Seeing the light wind sword travel towards him, the elderly man couldn't help but have a look of disdain. With a sneer, he lifted his powerful-looking right arm into the air and caught the blade in between his 2 fingers. Despite the strong amount of sword qi, it had not damaged the elderly man at all. Right after, the elder waved his other arm at the incoming water dragon, causing it to stop suddenly. In the next moment, the water dragon started to dissipate before dispersing into the qi of the world. Uncle Feng, help me kill him quickly. Seeing the arrival of the elderly man, the woman's face no longer had a look of terror. Instead, the lovely tone returned to her speech as she spoke angrily, as if she was wronged by Jian Shen. The elderly man didn't pay attention to her. Instead, his eyes gazed at the light-wind sword that was stopped by him with a small amount of astonishment. Tilting his head to look at Jian Shen, he said, "What is your name? And who is your master?" Chapter 98. Another heavy loss highlight above for title. Uncle Feng, what nonsense are you spouting at him? Help me kill him. The girl cried out behind him with a furious glare in her eyes. Already, her eyes were tearing up from the thought that Jian Shen had seen her body in its full glory. Indeed, just thinking about how she was naked in front of Jian Shen had caused her to be angry beyond belief, causing her to also feel wronged. This was the first time since she was born that she was seen by a man like this, and it was by a stranger. For the conservative lady, this type of outcome was worse than death. Haha, young miss. Although your Uncle Feng is unwilling to help out, then let your Uncle Yun come help teach this daring bully a lesson. At that moment, another voice came into the clearing as another white-robed elderly man came into view. Appearing in front of Jian Shen, he waved his fist for a brief moment before striking at Jian Shen's chest. The elder's strength was unbelievably profound. In that one fist, Jian Shen didn't doubt that it was extremely strong. Immediately dodging towards the side, Jian Shen suddenly felt a large amount of pressure on his body. The pressure was so large that it felt as if his entire body was burdened with a 1,000-pound weight, or even a mountain. Breathing was already a difficult task. His entire body felt like it was about to be crushed. Just at the moment when the pressure was at its heaviest, the azure and violet glow in his dantian began to flicker rapidly. However, while his dantian was undergoing such a state, Jian Shen himself did not notice. Old man Yin, hold on a moment. The first elder named Uncle Feng by the lady cried out as his face changed rapidly. Unfortunately, he had spoken too late. The one named Uncle Yin looked at his fist as it struck Jian Shen's chest precisely. A mouthful of blood escaped his mouth as he felt his internal organs get damaged. The elder had smashed Jian Shen's chest hard enough to leave a dent in it. Not only did the elder break Jian Shen's bones where he was hit, but even his internal organs were just as heavily damaged. In the moment the elder had attacked Jian Shen, the weak azure and violet glow flickered as it made contact with the elder's palm before instantly disappearing. Jian Shen, on the other hand, was sent flying back. The elder's face changed as he gave a small start. Looking at Jian Shen fly into the air with an flabbergasted face, his eyes contained a glint of disbelief and astonishment. Jian Shen flew 30 meters into the air before crashing into the ground with a large bang. As he laid on the ground, he spat out a large mouthful of blood as he felt the pain from his ruptured organs. Already his face was as white as a sheet of paper from the lack of blood. Even his face was lax. Seeing Jian Shen barely alive, the one named Uncle Yun started to blink slowly before opening his mouth to say, "Youngster, you have such a strong vitality if you can take one of my blows without dying. Fine then, today I will let you go." With that said, the one called Uncle Yun walked back towards the woman. "I hope there won't be any more disturbances," the elder behind the woman said. The one called Uncle Feng waved his hand and sent the light wind sword stuck between his fingers back towards Jian Shen. As it made contact with him, it disappeared from sight. "Young miss, let us leave now," the one named Uncle Feng said loudly as a large flying magical beast descended, landing near the three. The woman's anger wasn't completely satisfied, however. Turning her head back, she said, "Uncle Feng, that person isn't dead yet, that won't do. I want him dead today." She walked towards Jian Shen with her sword ready to strike. It was clear that she did not want Jian Shen to get away with seeing her bathe. "Young miss, don't make such trouble." Uncle Feng stood in front to block the girl from moving closer to Jian Shen. "Uncle Feng, The woman argued. She had still felt wronged to the point of tearing in the eyes, almost ready to cry at any moment. Young miss, don't be so unruly. It's getting late, so we should get going now. The elder behind her spoke flatly. With a wave of his hands, a large ball of Saint Force enveloped the lady and placed her on top of the flying magical beast. On top of the flying magical beast, the lady stamped her feet in anger at the elder who put her there. Uncle Yun, why aren't you spoiling Wan air? The two elders looked at each other in the eye with a look of helplessness. Stepping onto the flying magical beast, they immediately took off from the ground with a large gust of wind, sending them flying into the horizon. In midair, the lady stood on top of the back of the flying magical beast and glared down at the rapidly shrinking figure of Jian Chun. In her eyes was a look of anger that would never dissipate. Uncle Feng, Uncle Yin, what is going on with you two? How could you let that scoundrel go? She stamped her foot in angry grievance. The mist in her eyes had already become tears that threatened to fall off of her eyelashes. Hearing that, the one named Uncle Feng sighed. Judging by how wet and disorderly her hair was, he already knew what had happened to her. Young miss, that man is quite complicated. Right now the clan is under a great deal of pressure. At this critical moment, it is best to avoid to make new enemies, just in case they bring a new source of trouble to the clan. Uncle Feng said helplessly. Uncle Feng, since when were you a coward afraid of death? That scoundrel's strength was weak. How could you think that he could be a threat to our clan? The lady said angrily. Young miss, that man really isn't simple. It's best not to offend anyone. Although his power is quite weak, but the person behind him is definitely strong, said the one who first struck out at Jian Chun, Uncle Yin, with a solemn but worried face. Then he lifted his cloth-wrapped hand to show the two deep wounds on his right hand. Although the blood had stopped, the elder's right hand could still be seen as having two wounds that went from the hollow of his palm to the back of it, as if a sword had cut through it. When the lady saw the injured hand of the elder, her cherry-red lips opened wide along with her eyes in disbelief. Uncle Yun, you're injured. She cried out in astonishment. The one named Uncle Feng started before saying, Old man Yin, how unexpected for you to be injured. Uncle Yin nodded his head slowly. This wound was given to me by that 20-year-old youth. How is this possible, Uncle Yin? You have to be joking. The scoundrel's strength wasn't strong at all. If he couldn't even beat me, how would he be able to harm you? She bounded forward in shock. Old man Yin, how did you get such a wound like this? Uncle Feng said with doubt. Uncle Yin could only look back at the other with a blank face. I don't know that either. When I attacked him earlier, I felt a pain in my palm, and then I saw the wound. Whatever had hurt me, I don't know. Hearing this, Uncle Yin gave a gasp. This youngster really is complicated. From the moment I saw his saint weapon, I knew that it would stand out from the masses. His saint weapon wasn't like everyone else's. Whatever happened within him, it made his saint weapon even stronger. Even his strength isn't matching up with what is expected. The woman was left stunned by Uncle Yun's words. It's a good thing we didn't kill him. Otherwise the one standing behind him would be a huge bother for our clan if they stepped forward. Right now we can only hope the ones supporting him won't be too strong, or that this person had only inherited some techniques from his ancestors. By the riverside, Jian Chun laid down on the ground with blood dyeing his clothes red. The elder's fist had caused serious damage to Jian Chun. The bones in his chest were crushed, and his organs suffered extreme trauma. Right now, aside from being fully conscious, Jian Chun was powerless to move. It could be said that ever since Jian Chun was born, this was the most serious damage he had suffered. If it was not for the fact he had used a unique way to cultivate and had refined his body in ways that far outstripped others, the elder's hand would have sent him to a messy death. The light saint force from the world essence began to surge and condense towards Jian Chun. Quickly, Jian Chun was enveloped within the milky white glow and had it absorbed into every single pore of his body. With that, Jian Chun was beginning to recover at a very fast rate. Chapter 99. Returning to Wake City, the light saint force within the world essence gathered within Jian Chun and quickly began to heal him. However, Jian Chen's wounds were too serious, so even with the miraculous healing effects of the Light Saint Force, it took a long time for Jian Chen to recover. Controlling the Light Saint Force had taken up a lot of Jian Chen's spirit. After 4 hours, he had used up almost all of his spirit, causing him to stop. Right now he was suffering from major blood loss, as well as a dizzying headache. He was also very exhausted and desired sleep. It was almost as if he hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights, and was almost unconscious. After healing himself for 4 hours, his inner body was healed by a little less than half his original strength. His inner organs had been treated by the Light Saint Force, and although it wasn't completely healed, the injured parts had been regrown. All that was left was the fractured bones on his chest, that were slightly more troublesome than his organs. Regarding the serious injuries on his chest, the fractured bones had already pierced into his flesh. So whenever Jian Chen moved even the tiniest bit, the wounds on his chest would make Jian Chen feel even more pain. The pain was so intense that the signals his brain was receiving were practically torturing it. Slowly reclining on the grass, he closed his eyes and slowly started to use the rest of his spirit to heal himself. However, Jian Chen had fortunately memorized the entirety of the contents of the Azulite Sword Law, the method of recuperation. With the recuperation method, he could slowly regain his spirit. Jian Chen laid there on the grass for a whole day and night. Without moving his body a single time, his eyes had remained closed for just as long. The time quickly passed by as the afternoon approached. The blazing hot rays of the sun were slowly becoming moderately warm as it left the mountains. At that moment, the stone-like Jian Chen finally opened his eyes. After a full day and night of healing, the spirit he had used up was finally replenished. Seeing the color of the sky, Jian Chen didn't hesitate for a moment, and began to gather the Light Saint Force. Rapidly, he began to heal his chest once more. As the Light Saint Force entered his chest, pieces of the fractured bones had begun to reattach themselves and heal. For another 4 hours without stopping, Jian Chen's spirit was finally used up once more. However, after 4 hours of healing, Jian Chen's chest was finally fully recovered. However, Jian Chen's spirit wasn't recovered yet, and affected his mobility. So Jian Chen sat back down on the grass cross-legged, and began to use the recuperation method to recover the lost spirit. Although it wasn't too far from Wake City, but considering that the use of the Light Saint Force was far too conspicuous with its dazzling glow, and that healing in Wake City was too inconvenient, no one would be able to detect the Light Saint Force except for Radiant Saint Masters. However, who would be able to guarantee that there was a Radiant Saint Master within the vicinity of Wake City? Radiant Saint Masters were rare within the Tianyuan continent, so many people would fail to find and invite one to help themselves. Jian Chen thought that if he were to reveal his ability to use Light Saint Force like Radiant Saint Masters, then he would get no small amount of glory, and would never have to worry about a shortage of monster cores. However, Jian Chen didn't want to reveal that he could mimic the Radiant Saint Master's ability to use Light Saint Force, because his intuition told him that if he were to keep it a secret for now, then it would definitely help him out in the future. After 3 full days of continuous healing, Jian Chen's body was finally back to full health. Upon getting up, he immediately left for the official road back to Wake City. The official road was filled with caravans escorted by groups of armed yet blood-soaked mercenaries. Although Jian Chen was a lone traveler, no one paid extra attention to him. Despite his bloody clothes from the wounds he gained, to every single mercenary within the Tianyuan continent, this was a very common sight to see. Practically every mercenary had seen these types of things every day. Walking on the roadway, Jian Chen thought back to the event from 3 days ago, especially the beautiful girl and her naked body that had appeared right in front of him. This was a sight that had left a deep effect on Jian Chen, because even in his previous life, he had never had an experience like it before. 3 days ago was the first time he had ever seen the jade-like body of a woman to this extent, and this girl's body was almost as if it belonged to an immortal. However, when Jian Chen had thought about the lady's gigantic strength, his heart still couldn't quite believe it. The girl looked to be 18 years old, 20 years old at the oldest. The age difference between her and Jianchen was almost non-existent. But to be a great saint master at this age, Jianchen could only blush with shame at her innate talent. Soon enough, Jianchen entered Wake City and waited for the city guards to come and inspect him. Since he had the image of an injured and bloody survivor, there was no monetary tax to enter the city. Although the guards were greedy for money, their greed was not without morals. Upon entering Wake City, Jianchen didn't take a stroll and immediately headed towards an inn. Once he got a room, Jianchen began to cultivate. Although it had been less than a month ago that he had broken through to become a great saint, his strength was still not strong enough to protect himself within the Tianyuan continent. Not only did the girl from 3 days ago make Jianchen experience defeat, but she had also made him realize how much strength he needed. After paying for the room, Jianchen stayed there within the room for 10 days. In those 10 days, Jianchen hadn't taken a single step out of his room and only used the monster cores in his possession to cultivate. Even for meals he had the inn waitress deliver it straight to his room. After the 10 days had passed, Jianchen's strength had made huge improvements. Already reaching the middle great saint tier, the saint force within himself was now much stronger than before. Even his saint weapon, the light wind sword, had been upgraded and became even harder than before. With 10 days of cultivation, the Class 3 monster cores Jianchen were all but gone, leaving Jianchen with 2 Class 4 monster cores. Getting off the bed, Jianchen walked towards the window to look at the sky. Because he had spent so much time cultivating, he was no longer able to distinguish what time it was, and could only rely on the positioning of the sun to get an approximate time. Right outside, the sun was shining brightly without a cloud in the sky for miles. With the huge red flaming ball in the sky emitting strong heat rays, it signified the start of the afternoon. Right now, it should be time to deal with the silver-striped golden snake. I really look forward to the 10,000 immunity, Jianchen said as he observed the mass of people outside. Chapter 100. 10,000 Immunity. 1. Jianchen left the inn and went to the fair to buy a few dozen gourds to store water, as well as a cask large enough to fit a person in it. He also replenished his nearly exhausted supply of essentials for everyday life, as well as for living in the wilderness. Another 20 or so pairs of coarse clothing was purchased as well. After storing all of these within his space belt, Jianchen directly left Wake City and headed toward the wilderness. Jianchen arrived at a deserted grove and looked around. After confirming there were no people present, he removed a space ring from his space belt and retrieved the silver-striped golden snake from the ring. He then removed the dozens of gourds he had just purchased one by one and neatly placed them on the ground. Jianchen's heart uncontrollably leapt up to his throat when he saw the arm-thick and nearly 80-meter-long silver-striped golden snake in front of him. A feeling of excitement involuntarily arose from within his heart. After staring at the silver-striped golden snake for a while, Jianchen took a deep breath to gradually calm himself down. Afterwards, he slowly walked up to the snake, his light wind sword materializing in his hand. Pooh! Jianchen pierced his sword straight into the snake's scarred 7-inch area. Immediately afterwards, fresh red blood gushed out. Without any hesitation, Jianchen opened one of the gourds as fast as lightning and placed the opening about as large as a child's fist underneath the snake's body. The gourd directly began to collect that constant flow of blood. Meanwhile, the strong, pungent smell of greasy blood filled the air and gradually began to diffuse through the air. Smelling that continuously diffusing strong and stinging smell of greasy blood, Jianchen knit his brows and murmured, "This silver-striped golden snake is indeed worthy of being called a rare and unique beast. I hadn't imagined that the odor of the blood would already be so thick." Jianchen's tone seemed to be slightly concerned. He was worried that the snake's heavy odor would bring him some kind of trouble. While Jianchen was extremely anxious, somewhat impatient, and held much anticipation, all of the blood from the snake's body was finally collected after 2 hours. Half of the dozens of gourds that he had bought were already filled. According to Jianchen's calculations, the total amount of blood he had collected was around 100 kilograms in weight. After carefully sealing the blood-filled gourds, Jianchen placed them all into his space belt. Afterwards, he once again stored the snake's body into his space belt and immediately left the area. This silver-striped golden snake's blood's odor had already been diffusing through the air for 2 hours. Although it had become quite faint, Jianchen still wasn't certain that it wouldn't bring about any mishaps, so the sooner he left, the better. Although Jianchen knew that perhaps he was worrying a bit too much, for the sake of minimizing danger, he was still willing to go through such inconveniences. Jianchen returned to Wake City. After resting there for 2 days, and hearing of no special news, he once again left. This time, he didn't return to his original location. Instead, he arrived at the exact opposite location of where he had been previously. After advancing nearly 20 miles down a path, he finally found a desolate and safe area. He then once again removed the silver-striped golden snake from his belt and began dissecting the body. Although he could have dissected the body within the city, the silver-striped golden snake was, after all, not a normal magical beast. Once its body was dissected, that strong odor of its blood would once again permeate the area. Such a unique scent of blood would definitely attract quite a few experts to investigate. With Jianchen's current level of strength, he was still unable to go up against the many experts located in Wake City. The dissection of the body went smoothly. Although the defense of the silver-striped golden snake's outer layer of golden snake scales was extremely strong, Jianchen's current strength had been raised by quite a lot compared to his previous level. Thus, cutting apart the snake's scales only required a small amount of strength. Jianchen carefully removed a thumb-sized blood-red object from the snake's stomach. When he lifted it up to his eye level to examine it closer, he couldn't help but smile and murmur to himself. So this is the silver-striped golden snake's precious snake gall. The color of the snake's gall was completely different from any other snake's. Normal snake galls had a bluish green and black color, but this silver-striped golden snake's gall was completely crimson. It looked similar to a red gem. Jianchen took out a small jade bottle from his space belt and carefully placed the thumb-sized snake gall into the bottle. This snake gall was extremely important. If he wanted to refine the 10,000 immunity pill, then he'd need quite a few snake galls. This body part's importance was much more precious than the silver-striped golden snake's blood. Soon after, the silver-striped golden snake's skin had been completely removed by Jianchen. At the same time, the snake's appearance drastically changed. It now looked like a long. The silver-striped golden snake's most precious parts were its blood and gall. Its other internal organs and its flesh were also worth considerable amounts, but they weren't very useful in Jianchen's eyes. Afterwards, Jianchen stored the snake's carcass back into the space ring, intending to proceed with the next steps later. After finishing up the silver-striped golden snake matter, Jianchen looked around his surroundings. He hesitated for a bit and looked indecisive as he seemed to stand there and contemplate for a moment. Finally, Jianchen bit down and retrieved the large cask that he had prepared earlier and lightly placed it on the ground. He then continued to retrieve all the blood-filled gourds and proceed to empty them into the cask. Jianchen now planned to refine the 10,000 immunity. This was because the silver-striped golden snake's blood had too strong of an odor, making it impossible for him to refine it in a city filled with people. Soon after, all the blood within the gourds had been poured into the large cask, the nearly 100 kilograms worth of blood filling majority of the person-tall cask. Now the strong stinging smell of blood was emitted from the cask and circled around the air for a long time without dispersing. Such a large amount of blood collected together made the smell even more dense, and it assaulted Jianchen's sense of smell, making him almost unable to breathe. Some special magical beast's blood was completely different from a normal magical beast's. The silver-striped golden snake was an example of this. When Jianchen had drunk the snake's blood to detoxify himself, Jianchen had completely ignored its extremely greasy smell, since he had been completely focused on curing himself. Thus, he hadn't noticed the snake's blood had had such an intolerable heavy odor back then. Chapter 101. 10,000 Immunity 2. Put on. Jianchen stripped off all of his clothes and jumped straight into the blood-filled cask. At the same time, he retrieved the snake gall from within the jade bottle and directly swallowed it. Not long after the gall entered his stomach, Jianchen immediately felt a surge of activity from his 5 senses within his body. His stomach began to grumble loudly against his will, as if he was currently having diarrhea. Jianchen sat cross-legged within the cask. The blood in the cask submerged everything up to his neck, leaving only his head exposed outside. Feeling the ice-cold air emitted from the blood, Jianchen gradually relaxed. He closed his eyes and began to absorb the unique genes from within the blood, following the procedure he had read in books. It was because of the existence of these unique elements within the silver-striped golden snake's blood that gave the blood its ability to detoxify poison. According to the books, one must absorb all of these unique elements within the body and then fuse them into their own blood in order to gain an unpoisonable body. The blood would support the body and grant one's flesh an overpowering ability to resist poisons. The ability was so powerful that one could even become completely immune to poisons. Once the silver-striped golden snake's blood was used to refine the 10,000 immunity, one would be entirely immune to any poisons weaker than the silver-striped golden snake's. One would even gain the effect of being able to strongly resist poisons at the same level as the silver-striped golden snakes, although one cannot be immune to it. Thus, the amount of danger the poison would be able to inflict would be drastically decreased, or the spread of the poison would be greatly deterred. Although the 10,000 immunity wasn't immune to all the poisons that existed, it was enough to make Jianchen excited. After all, the silver-striped golden snake's poison had widespread fame on the Tianyuan continent. There were just a handful of poisons more potent than the silver-striped golden snakes. Moreover, such poisons were extremely uncommon and were as rare to see as the silver-striped golden snake itself. Jianchen sat cross-legged in the cask with his eyes tightly shut. His stomach continued to loudly grumble extremely loudly. If anyone was standing next to Jianchen, they would be able to clearly hear the sound. Within Jianchen's stomach was something similar to a roaring sea. It was very stormy. At the same time, an extremely nauseating feeling arose from Jianchen's heart, and Jianchen could barely stop himself from vomiting. I guess the snake's gallbladder is being dissolved. The bile inside is leaking out. Jianchen resisted the nausea with great difficulty. He inwardly recalled that the books had stated if one wanted to refine the 10,000 immunity, aside from blood, the most important part was the gallbladder. Both the gallbladder and the blood were essential components, because the blood's poison-resistant special elements could only be absorbed into one's body by being drawn in by the gallbladder. These poison-resistant elements weren't like world essence that could be absorbed whenever one wanted to. If one didn't have the appropriate object to draw them in, then even if one had the blood, they wouldn't be able to absorb the elements. Although directly drinking the fresh blood could also detoxify the poison, this could only temporarily address the issue. Not long after, a simple trip to the toilet would drain the consumed blood. There was no way one could even think the way to obtaining an unpoisonable body would be like that. At that moment, a warm current suddenly appeared in Jianchen's abdomen. The warmth continued to increase, and in that instant, Jianchen felt like his abdomen was burning, as if a fire was blazing within it. Along with this abrupt uprising of changes within his abdomen, Jianchen's pores all opened, as if linked together. At the same time, inside of the cask, traces of that bizarre and special energy began to materialize like small fish within the crimson blood. They all began to gradually swim toward Jianchen and enter his body through his pores. Just as this energy was entering his body, Jianchen's originally serene expression suddenly changed. The bizarre energy entering him instantly changed from being docile, like a small sheep, into a ferocious group of tigers. They wildly revolted within Jianchen's body, making his entire body suffer from intense pain. This is bad. There are unexpectedly some magical beasts' unique berserk elements within this blood. Moreover, it's even stronger than those within a monster core. Sensing his body's changes, Jianchen instantly understood what was happening. All magical beasts' energies contain berserk elements. This was something that everyone in Tianyuan continent has known for ages. However, These berserk elements were almost all hidden within monster cores. So Jianchen hadn't expected that they would also exist in the silver-striped golden snake's blood. Moreover, these berserk elements were much more powerful than the ones that he had absorbed from monster cores during cultivation, perhaps even 100-fold stronger. Resisting the powerful pain arising from his body with much difficulty, an extremely baffled thought popped up in Jianchen's mind. How come I hadn't felt these berserk elements at all when I first drank the silver-striped golden snake's blood? Jianchen sat in the cask, his body beginning to shake as his entire body down to even his pores were in intense pain, and the muscles on Jianchen's couldn't help but twitch. His originally flushed face had gradually begun to turn pale. The traces of the bizarre and special energy within the snake's blood seemed to be attracted by something, and continuously rushed into Jianchen's pores. As the amount of energy in his body continued to increase, the berserk elements contained within also increased, and became more and more powerful. The pain brought forth onto his body by these berserk elements made Jianchen sweat profusely. However, he clenched his teeth and fists tightly, and continued to resist it. At that moment, the azure and violet glows in Jianchen's dantian suddenly emitted faint light rays. Meanwhile, the fierce pain Jianchen was feeling suddenly disappeared without a trace. The berserk elements absorbed by him, that had accompanied the bizarre energy within the blood, seemed to have been attracted by some strange force. As soon as they entered Jianchen's body, they immediately began to fly towards the azure and violet glows in his dantian. For a while, Jianchen was a bit at loss at the sudden changes. However, he soon realized what had happened, and immediately sighed in relief. He knew that every time he absorbed energy from monster cores, the berserk elements contained would also be ingested by the azure and violet glows in his dantian. Therefore, there was nothing strange about what had just happened. Without the torment of the berserk elements, Jianchen's previously pained expression immediately loosened. However, he still didn't relax from this, and immediately surveyed the current situation his inner body was in. The only thing he could sense was the special elements. The berserk elements within the snake's blood had been completely absorbed by the azure and violet glows in his dantian upon entering his body. There were only some harmless special elements remaining, and they were gradually gathering in the direction of where the snake's gallbladder was. Eventually, they completely surrounded the gallbladder. The absorption of these special elements was extremely slow. Jianchen stayed in the cask for an entire day and night, before he was finally able to finish absorbing all of the special elements in the blood. Currently, the snake's gallbladder in Jianchen's stomach had already gathered all of the special elements, and formed a thick layer. After a day and night of absorbing all of the elements within the blood in the cask not only lost all of its color and luster, even the intolerable smell of it had disappeared without a trace. Right now, there was only one step remaining until Jianchen could refine the 10,000 immunity. This step was also the most important one. Whether or not he would be successful completely depended on this step. Chapter 102, 10,000 Immunity 3. Right now, there was only one step remaining until Jianchen could refine the 10,000 immunity. This step was also the most important one. Whether or not he would be successful completely depended on this step. By this point, all of the most important parts of the silver-striped golden snake's blood had been cleanly gathered by Jianchen and concentrated in the gallbladder to form a strange substance. The strange substance was the antivenom and the blood of the silver-striped golden snake combined together. In accordance to the contents of the books, Jianchen needed to absorb the antivenom and blood substance into his own body, and once he had completely assimilated it into his body, only then would he successfully gain the 10,000 immunity. As long as the substance was absorbed into the body, then Jianchen's blood would take on a detoxifying property. Not only that, but the body would undergo changes as the blood circulated around the body. After some time, the body would become resistant to poison and grow an immunity to weaker poisons without fear of harm. With a heavy expression, Jianchen stood up. This was the final step as well as the most crucial one, because the antivenom substance would only gather within his body if the gallbladder of the snake was present. If there was no gallbladder, then the substance would dissipate uselessly. Before he could digest the snake's gallbladder, he would need to assimilate the anti-venom within his bloodstream. Jianchen calmed himself down and began to control the substance around his body. However, as the substance left the gallbladder, a strange attraction started to happen and began to pull at the substance Jianchen was trying to control. Jianchen bit his lips as he increased the amount of focus he was putting in his control. Although Jianchen's strength was still quite weak, his spirit was unquestionably strong. Under his increased control, the strange substance had finally left the gallbladder and assimilated into his bloodstream. However, just as he was assimilating the bloodstream, the strange substance completely separated from the blood, like two opposite poles of a magnet. The two seemed incompatible with each other, and there was no way they could possibly fuse. However, Jianchen still wasn't discouraged. He once again focused his strength on controlling the strange substance to forcefully merge with the bloodstream. He then watched it from the side. If the strange substance showed the slightest indication of separating again, he would immediately pour all his focus onto it and force it back into the bloodstream. As the blood flowed throughout his veins, the substance which Jianchen had forcefully absorbed into his blood was finally completely assimilated. Surprisingly, a part of the substance had a green tint to its color, but in the end that had also been absorbed into the blood and disappeared. As the energy from the substance was absorbed into his bloodstream, Jianchen felt that his blood had somehow gotten weaker, as if something else had happened. After a portion of the energy from the substance was assimilated, Jianchen didn't know how much time had passed, but the gallbladder he had digested had shrunk a bit. Jianchen knew that the gallbladder wouldn't be able to survive in his body for long. So without a moment of hesitation, Jianchen had forcefully broken a part of the substance away and began to try to assimilate it into his bloodstream one more time. Time after time, Jianchen had tried again for an unknown amount of time, but in the end, the very last of the substance had successfully been assimilated into his bloodstream, as the gallbladder was on the brink of disappearing. Feeling the noticeable change in his bloodstream, Jianchen let out a sigh of relief. His heart grew excited as a bright smile took over his face. The 10,000 immunity, I never thought I would gain the unpoisonable body, Jianchen said inwardly. From his past 20 years of experience, he knew that this new world he was in was even more dangerous, so the 10,000 immunity would bring him a great amount of benefits. At the very least, if he was to be captured by his enemies, he wouldn't have to worry about poisoned food. However, while Jianchen had successfully refined the 10,000 immunity, it was still in its primary stage and not its perfect stage. While his blood had fused with the antivenom from the blood of the silver-striped golden snake, this fusion was not yet complete and would need some time before it would reach perfection. Once his blood and the antivenom had perfectly fused together, it would then circulate around his body endlessly and transform the bones, flesh and organs within his body. Every part of his body would gain the antivenom capability. This would be the true extent of the 10,000 immunity. Slowly, Jianchen opened his eyes to the first rays of light. In the horizons, the fiery sun was just peeking out, meaning that it was only the start of the morning. Jianchen leapt out from the blood-filled cask and took out a towel from his space belt to clean off the blood on him before wearing a new set of clothes. After all that time Jianchen had spent in the cask, the blood within had already been reduced by a quarter. Even the previously bloody smell had dissipated, and the color of the blood had started to darken a bit. Looking at the cask beside him, Jianchen kicked at the container firmly. The cask overturned and broke on the hard ground, spilling the blood onto the ground. While the blood of the silver-striped golden snake was incomparably precious, the most important part of the blood had already been absorbed by him. The remaining parts of the blood could only be said to be equal to water, and did not have a single use for it anymore. After returning to Wake City once more, Jianchen entered a restaurant and ordered a few dishes to eat his fill. After a day and night of not eating, Jianchen's stomach was a bit hungry. Right now was the busiest time for the restaurant. The environment inside was already very lively. The people coming and going was like an endless stream, and filled up the tables in a flash. Even the waitresses of the restaurant were constantly scampering around, busily taking orders and delivering dishes. "Little brother, the seats here are all occupied already. Could I possibly sit here with you?" Chapter 103. Flame Mercenaries. Highlight above for title. Little brother, the seats here are all occupied already. Could I possibly sit here with you? At that moment, a deep-sounding voice came from behind Jian Chun. Turning his head to look at the source, Jian Chun saw a middle-aged man with a big smile on his face. He stood across on the opposite side of Jian Chun and stared at him with a good-natured look. The middle-aged man looked to be around 40 years old and wore a cyan-colored robe. However, to Jian Chun's sharp eyes, this robe was made of coarse material and so was categorized as a cheap cloth. With his short black hair, there was nothing about him that stood out. Even his good-natured smile wasn't a fake one. Jian Chun nodded his head with a smile. "Since the restaurant has suddenly filled up, I can't possibly use up all this room by myself. Come and sit with me." "Then many thanks, little brother." The other man laughed as he cupped his hands together. Then he pulled out the stool and sat down on it. "Miss, a cup of wine and a pound of your finest horse meat," the man called out. "Okay, please wait a moment, honored customer," the waitress called back. Jian Chun stared at the middle-aged man in front of him for a while before finally tearing his eyes off of him and looking back at his own meal. The middle-aged man looked at Jian Chun and chuckled. "And what should I call this younger brother?" "Jian Chun," he responded with a mouthful of meat, so the words did not come out as audibly. "Jian Chun, what a pleasant name." The middle-aged man sized up Jian Chun with his eyes and then opened his mouth to ask, "Brother Jian Chun, I'm assuming you are a mercenary as well?" He nodded his head. "Correct, but because my strength is quite low, I am only one of the lowest of D-ranked mercenaries." A mercenary's rank corresponded with their strength and their merits for missions done. The lowest of the D-ranked mercenaries were generally newbie saints. However, there were a few cultivators that did not yet condense their saint weapons amongst the D-ranked mercenaries. Even though the middle-aged man looked to be quite well-natured, Jian Chun didn't dare to reveal his precise strength to him. The man laughed with no ill intentions. "Little brother, you can't be any older than 20 years old. Once you've successfully condensed your saint force into a saint weapon, then your potential will be unlimited." The man's words were sincere, but after he spoke he gave a long sigh. Thinking back, I was 25 years old when I first condensed my saint weapon and broke through to become a saint. To think little brother here is only 20 years old and is a saint. I don't think it'll be too far off until there will be another gifted Earth Saint Master in the future. When the 3 words Earth Saint Master were said, the man's face had looked almost expectant. Hearing that, Jian Chun couldn't help but look at the middle-aged man once more. While he had a better impression of this man, it was still nothing more than just that. Condensing a saint weapon at the age of 25 could be said to be quite mediocre within the Tianyuan continent. This type of person would be limited to being a great saint master at the best, and without coming across an opportunity, they would never be able to break through to become an Earth Saint Master. After all, in the space between a great Saint Master and an Earth Saint Master was an unbelievably difficult threshold. This threshold is so difficult that condensing a saint weapon was easier by 100,000 times. This is because from the breakthrough to an Earth Saint Master from a great Saint Master, if one was not careful, they would fall in a land without redemption. In a less severe case, they would suffer a serious injury and lose their entire cultivation, thus becoming a cripple. In the worst-case scenario, they would forfeit their lives to the Yellow Springs. TO note, https://yen, Wikipedia, org/wiki/du the Chinese version of hell, equivalent to Yomi of Japanese mythology. The threshold separating the Earth Saint Master from the Great Saint Master was one dividing life from death. There were many people with mediocre talent that reached the Great Saint Master, but were unable to break through to become an Earth Saint Master. Many more had even died trying to make the breakthrough. The success rate of breaking through to become an Earth Saint Master was only 1%. Regarding this bit of information, Jianchen had known about it. Whether or not it was in the Kargath Library or the Changyang Mansion Library, Jianchen had read about it. Little brother, I am guessing you haven't joined a mercenary group yet. The middle-aged man asked Jianchen with a small smile. Hearing this, Jianchen's heart jumped as he realized what the man was about to say, but he nodded his head in response. That is correct. Little brother, why don't you join my flame mercenaries? Although the amount of people within our group isn't large, the mercenaries in here are quite good-natured, he said eagerly. Jianchen became silent as he listened to the man. He had never thought about joining a mercenary group before, since in his mind, joining a mercenary group was only a burden that would limit his free-roaming spirit. It would also bring his cultivation rate to a standstill, since the only way he could cultivate rapidly was to use monster cores. Monster cores were absolutely necessary, and so the amount needed was also enormous. If he were to go into the magical beast mountain range by himself, the profits he earned would naturally be his, and keep up with his consumption rate. However, if he were to join the mercenary group, it would be easier to kill magical beasts at the cost of splitting up the amount of monster cores with the entire group, which would be a problem. If Jianchen were to join a mercenary group, he needed to go solo. Otherwise, the monster core distribution would be given to other people as well. Seeing Jianchen's silence, the middle-aged man didn't give up. Brother Jianchen, my flame mercenaries is only a small-sized group that doesn't restrict the actions of anyone like they do in the larger groups. With so many different types of rules and restrictions that makes one's head want to explode, our group is not like that. Joining my mercenary group is merely helping the group have an easier way to earn money. You must know that the magical beast mountain range is a profitable way of earning money, and that monster cores sell for a high price while helping us cultivate our saint force, which is extremely essential. Even the parts of a magical beast can be sold for a high price to any of the restaurants. As our numbers increase, then so does our strength. Even if we come across a high-leveled magical beast, we would be able to kill it. Just think, if we are able to kill a high-leveled magical beast, imagine how large our profits would be. Even your heart would consider this, I bet. The man stopped momentarily to breath before continuing. If you are by yourself, even if you can deal with a few low-leveled magical beasts, then it would not sell for much money, I'm sure. Even if you spend so much energy killing it, the amount of money earned would not even cover your healing costs. And if you come across an ambush from a few high-leveled magical beasts, how long do you think a single person could run away from a dozen high-leveled magical beasts? This is definitely impossible, and in the end, that person would only be throwing his life away. Seeing how Jianchen was still silent, the man gave it another try. Brother Jianchen, if it's concerning the matter of distribution of benefits, you don't have to worry. While our flame mercenaries was recently established a few years ago, the brothers within the group are made of steel who care for the bonds of friendship over the metal of money. In the case that our group has a profit, then no matter if you worked hard or not, the group will not treat you unfairly. Chapter 104. Joining a mercenary group. Highlight above for title. Seeing how Jianchen was still silent, the man gave it another try. Brother Jianchen, if it's concerning the matter of distribution of benefits, you don't have to worry. While our flame mercenaries was recently established a few years ago, the brothers within the group are made of steel who care for the bonds of friendship over the metal of money. In the case that our group has a profit, then no matter if you worked hard or not, the group will not treat you unfairly. With that said, the middle-aged man had stopped talking. He had said all that needed to be. The only thing left was to see what choice Jianchen would make. Jianchen's eyebrows furrowed in thought as he considered the benefits within his head. Finally biting his lip, his eyes shone with a firm decision. All right then, I'll join your group. However, I have some conditions. I will not have any type of restriction put onto me. Neither will I have to obey anyone. Also, if I want to leave the group in the future, the group will not try to stop me in any way. The middle-aged man looked at Jianchen with doubt. Brother Jianchen, could it be you're not going to even ask about how strong the flame mercenaries are, or if there are any strong enemies? You have to realize, if our flame mercenaries have a strong enemy and you join, then it will definitely bring you trouble as well, and may very well be a concern to your life. Jianchen laughed gently as he said, "If things like this were too frightening, then why did I bother to leave my home to explore the world? If I have decided to join your mercenary group, then a factor like this was not even in my range of thinking." The middle-aged man began to laugh without restraint. Good. Brother Jianchen, I really can't take your age seriously, you're quite the brave person. The conditions you asked for won't be of any problem, since our group is a small one whose only goal is to earn money. The mercenaries in our group won't try to restrict you either. If you want to leave the group, you're free to do so at any time. This couldn't be any better. Jianchen nodded his head. The middle-aged man nodded as well. We've talked for quite some time, and I didn't even introduce myself yet. My name is Kendall, captain of the Flame Mercenaries. Brother Jianchen, if you don't mind, then call me Uncle Kendall. Whatever titles people give to the captains, I care not for it. Kendall laughed. All right, then in the future I'll call you Uncle Kendall. In Jianchen's eyes, Kendall was someone he had a good impression of, and seemed to be quite honest and dependable now. Soon after, Kendall and Jianchen both finished their food, and left the restaurant together, to go to the mercenary union to take care of the formality procedure. Joining a mercenary group was relatively simple. So in a flash, Jianchen had taken care of the entire procedure, and became an official member of the Flame Mercenaries. Jianchen, let's go. I'll take you to the temporary meeting spot, and introduce you to the other members. Kendall began to walk on the road, as they both left the mercenary union. On the way, Kendall began to explain a few things about the Flame Mercenaries, allowing Jianchen to gain a better understanding. The Flame Mercenaries were established 5 years ago, as a small mercenary group. Soon after they were established, the members had spent the majority of their time in the magical beast forest killing magical beasts for money. Very rarely did they accomplish any missions. So for that reason, they remained to be a D-ranked group, without having a single chance to prove their strength. Including Kendall, there were 9 other members within the group, so including Jianchen, the Flame Mercenaries now had 10 members in total. According to Kendall, in those 8 members, aside from himself being at the primary Saint Master stage, 5 members were at the Great Saint stage, while the remaining 3 were only at the Saint level. After he said that, Kendall slapped his forehead as he turned to Jianchen with a smile. That's right, brother Jianchen. I still don't know what type of strength you possess right now. Although Kendall's heart could only guess that Jianchen was only at the Saint level due to his young age. But this was only a guess. Until he got a straight answer from Jianchen, he didn't dare to make a rash conclusion. With a small chuckle, Jianchen took out the badge representing him as a mercenary from his space belt. This mercenary badge was given to Jianchen when he first became one, proving that he was a D-ranked mercenary. Seeing the badge, Kendall's face didn't change at all. Then our Flame Mercenaries have just added another saint to our ranks. With this increase in strength, hunting magical beasts will be that much easier. Jianchen walked with Kendall for about the time it took for an oil lamp to burn out, before finally arriving at an ordinary-looking house with broken cobblestone steps leading to it. The house was not very big, and the eaves of the house had plenty of cobwebs hanging about it. Even the walls had many scars from the passage of time and nature. It was clear to see that this house had been in existence in Wake City for many years, but no one had taken care of it. Kendall walked up to the door of the house and lightly knocked on it. Not too long after, the wooden door opened slightly to reveal the dark-skinned head of a person. Judging from his skinny face, the youth looked to be around 26 years old, and looked like the type of person to be a snatcher, if put within a group of people. Upon seeing Kendall, the youth's face revealed a smile as he said, Uncle Kendall, I just knew it was you. Soon after, Jianchen followed Kendall into the room. While the light within the house was dusky, it did not affect Jianchen's vision at all. As Jianchen looked around the house, he began to take in the sight in its entirety. The house from the inside wasn't too big, and the layout wasn't complicated at all. Aside from a few plank beds, There was a single long table along with a few stools. In fact, the room's layout could even be said to be quite crude. On top of the plank beds were a few bored people lazing about with a bottle of wine in their hands. However, when Captain Kindle entered the room, everyone immediately stared at him and started to gather around him. Gather around everyone, let me introduce you all to Brother Jianshin. He has just recently joined our Flame Mercenaries and is the youngest out of all the people in our group. Starting today, I hope everyone can take care of him. As soon as he entered the room, Kindle had pulled Jianshin along to introduce him. At this, Jianshin knew he had to say something. Standing with his feet together and cupping his hands in a salute towards everyone, he smiled. I am a newcomer here. I hope that everyone will help keep an eye on me. Chapter 105. Team Operation. Everyone in the room turned their gazes away from Kindle to Jianshin. But the moment they saw his young face, everyone was astonished. However, Jianshin's words had a flattering effect on them. He needed to make a good impression since first impressions were very important when meeting new people. Brother Jianshin, your name is Jianshin, right? Come and sit down quickly. No matter how young you are, the moment you join our group, you are our brother to enjoy blessings and endure misfortune together with. In the future, if you find someone that is bullying you, come and find me. A tall but sturdy person spoke as he got up from the bed. Crossing over to Jianshin, he placed his right hand on his shoulder, and then pushing him towards the table to sit at. Jianshin smiled. This one doesn't know how to call his older brother. Looking at the man, Jianshin thought him to be quite sturdy with his muscles protruding out noticeably. From his stature and physique, the man looked to be in his 30s. And even in the dark room, Jianshin could tell that this man was relatively dark-skinned, to the point of resembling a black person. His entire body was filled with scars and old injuries that seemed to have originated from magical beasts. Just one look at him, and Jianshin could tell that the man was quite experienced with dealing with magical beasts. I'm called Hupa. Brother Jianshin, if you don't mind, feel free to call me Big Brother Hupu in the future. Since I'm older than you, it's not going to be all that bad anyways. He sat by Jianshin's side and poured him a glass of water with a big smile. All right then. In the future I'll call you Brother Hupa. Jianshin laughed. At that point, the people who were previously drinking in the middle of the room stood up as well. Brother Jianshin, let me introduce you to everyone. Kendall pointed his fingers at a few of the people around them. Excluding Jianshin and Kendall, there was another 6 male mercenaries. Their age ranged around 30 to 40 years old, and there were even 2 twins in the small group named Zhou Dekai and Zhou Xiaokai who were both 28 years old. The both of them had the power of a great saint and had the same exact facial features. If it were not for the fact one of them had a scar over their forehead, then it would have been extremely difficult to tell which one of the twins was the older twin and which was the younger twin. The other 4 people were 32 years old, and aside from the primary great saint Hupa, the other 3 people were called Yun Xian, Xiao Dao, and Chong Ningfeng. Yun Xian was relatively tall with a wisely face that made him look like a scholar. At the age of 25, he possessed the strength of a middle saint. Xiao Dao, on the other hand, was tiny, and with his skinny body, he almost looked like a skeleton. In comparison to Yun Xian, Xiao Dao was seemingly weaker than him. Aside from Jianshin, Xiao Dao was the youngest of the bunch at the age of 22 years old, who also had the strength of a middle saint. Chong Ningfeng was a middle-aged man with a calm composure. At the age of 30, Ningfeng was 2 years older than Hupa, and was a middle great saint. Jianshin, this is our Flame Mercenaries group. Aside from the people here, there are another 2 people at the market buying items, but I'm sure they'll be back soon. Kendall said, tomorrow will be another operation for the Flame Mercenaries, where everyone will be participating in. Brother Jianshin, are you willing to join us? There aren't many rules, but if you don't want to join, then no one will try to force you. This is a voluntary event. Operation? What type of operation? Jianshin blinked curiously. Kendall gave an incredulous stare at Jianshin before downing the wine in the cup from the table. What other type of operation is there? We're going to go to the Magical Beast Mountain Range to hunt for magical beasts. After all, our flame mercenaries was created for those who wanted to group together to hunt for magical beasts. With our current strength, selling the monster cores are all that we can do to earn money. Then of course I'll go. What other reason do I need to go to the magical beast mountain range? Jianchen chuckled as he replied, Brother Jianchen, you don't need to worry. Although you've a weaker strength than us, our combined profits won't exclude you in any way. If your contributions are enough, then you'll get your fair share in accordance to the distribution. Jianchen, the magical beast mountain range is very evil and is filled with hidden dangers. In the case that we come across a class 3 magical beast that the captain and your older brothers cannot handle, then it is very possible that your life will be lost. So Jianchen, take your time and think about if you really want to go or not. The speaker this time was the youngest person aside from Jianchen Xiaodao. His shining eyes stared at Jianchen with a sincere expression. From his voice, a serious tone could be heard, warning Jianchen of the dangers with a heartfelt message. Hearing Xiaodao speak, everyone in the room grew even more solemn. A class 3 magical beast was enough to bring about a huge amount of pressure, even though Captain Kendall had the strength of a primary saint master. But when it came to a class 3 magical beast, he would only be able to protect himself. It was oftenly seen that a magical beast was stronger than its same-level human counterpart. On the Tianyuan continent, if one wanted to go hunt for magical beasts at the same level as them, they wouldn't stand a chance against the strong magical beasts without a strong cultivation or battle skill. This was practically an impossible task unless one had an attributed saint force. Otherwise, it was better to run away to preserve your own life. And even though Captain Kendall was a primary saint master, his saint force didn't have an attribute, so his attacks would be far weaker than those with an attribute. Against a regular class 3 magical beast, while he could fight it, it was only to protect himself. If he were to come across a stronger or faster class 3 magical beast, then even Captain Kendall would be hard-pressed to escape with his life, and most likely end up as a type of cuisine for the magical beasts to enjoy. But no one in the room would have expected that the moment Jianchen heard the words class 3 magical beast, there would be disdain in his eyes. The moment he had become a primary great saint, he had already started to hunt and kill class 3 magical beasts by himself. It could be said that the regular class 3 magical beasts posed no threat to Jianchen at all other than the silver-striped golden snake. By this point in time, Jianchen's strength was already at the middle great saint level, which was even stronger than a primary great saint many times over. Don't worry everyone, my strength isn't all that weak. After going to the magical beast mountain range once in the past, I've learned many things in there. Jianchen said. Chapter 106. The peculiar Dantian. Following that, Jianchen and the flame mercenaries began to talk about the many interesting things they had heard about while traveling through the Tianyuan continent. As they talked, Jianchen and the flame mercenaries had subconsciously grown closer and became friendlier. But what was worth mentioning was that every single one of the members of the flame mercenaries were straightforward with their words, Captain Kendall included. All of them were quite emotional. And even though Jianchen had revealed that he was a D-ranked mercenary, not a single one of them had held him in contempt or treated him badly. On this continent where power was the ultimate ruling power, people like this were extremely rare. And thus, Jianchen's impression of the flame mercenaries had grown quickly. Unaware of the passage of time, the afternoon glow quickly came in as a knock on the door alerted everyone on the inside of visitors. That's definitely Kobolds who is knocking. Hearing the knock, Xiaodao revealed a happy smile as he went to open the door. As Jianchen watched the door open, he wondered what the remaining 2 people of the flame mercenaries were like. The door opened as 2 plain-clothed people walked into the room. The first person looked to be around 30 years old with a relatively built stature that matched Jianchen's own physique and eyes that shone just as bright. The one following behind was a person who resembled someone around Captain Kendall's age. While his face was rather ordinary looking, the shine in his eyes were anything but ordinary. Kobolds dear, you 2 finally came back. Captain Kendall laughed. Come, let me introduce you to Jian Chun here, who just recently joined our flame mercenaries. From this point on we are all brothers here, so it is important that we pay attention to one another. Kendall then turned to look at Jian Chun. Brother Jian Chun, the younger person is called Kobolds. Not only is he quite strong, but he is the most intelligent person within our flame mercenaries. Whatever action we considered on doing was suggested by Kobolds. The person next to him is Deer, who is similarly the strongest mercenary within our group after me, who is at the peak level Great Saint. I believe that in 3 years, he will make a breakthrough and become a Saint Master. Jian Chun cupped his hands in salute towards Kobolds and Deer as a sign of greeting and respect. Jian Chun, just by looking at you, I'm guessing you're around 20 years old, so I'm not quite sure how strong you are exactly. Kobold stared at Jian Chun with a calculative look and a curious tone. Jian Chun merely laughed without saying anything more before taking out his mercenary badge from within his space belt. It wasn't too long ago that I became a D-ranked mercenary. Oh. Kobolds nodded his head as he continued to stare at Jian Chun, his eyes revealing the curious glint that shone brightly. Then he took his space belt and handed it towards Kendall. Uncle Kendall, I've already prepared everything we'll need for the operation tomorrow. Taking the space belt from Kobolds, Kendall said, That's good. Then now that all the preparations for the trip is done, we will set out tomorrow morning. This time, we'll definitely hunt plenty of magical beasts. Brother Jian Chun, do you have any complaints? None. I will listen to Uncle Kendall. Jian Chun laughed. All right, then everybody should rest up for today. Tomorrow will be another day to go all out. Leaving the house afterwards, Jian Chun began to stroll around Wake City by himself. In regards to the operation tomorrow, Jian Chun didn't care at all for it, because with the flame mercenaries' strength, if they didn't want to die straight away, then they would first go hunt for Class 2 magical beasts. Although the flame mercenaries had 1 Saint Master and 4 Great Saints, they weren't able to compete with a Class 3 magical beast without trouble. So the flame mercenaries had no choice but to hunt for Class 2 magical beasts for now. But in Jian Chun's case, it could even be said that there was nothing that could pose a threat to him but a Class 4 magical beast. Even if he were to come across a Class 4 magical beast he couldn't beat, Jian Chun was confident in his ability to run away at the very least. Because of these reasons, Jian Chun did not feel any type of pressure on him about tomorrow's operation. After he had talked with the other mercenaries about what other supplies he would need, Jian Chun had already collected the majority of them and continued to stroll around Wake City. It had been over a month since Jian Chun had first come to Wake City, but the majority of his time was spent in the magical Beast Mountain Range. He had only spent a few days inside a room, and even then almost all of that time was spent cultivating. He didn't have any time to himself yet, so Jian Chun had wanted to take advantage of this free period to take a break. Even though Wake City wasn't an immensely huge city, it was still large in its own right. Even with its expansive iron wall that encircled the city, a person would be able to reach the west side from the east if they walked fast enough in a single day. Because of its close proximity to the magical Beast Mountain Range, the borders of the city was always lively, so a third of the lands in Wake City were owned by restaurants and private personnel. Jian Chun continued to slowly stroll down the street and look at the many street vendors by the side. Many of these vendors were mercenaries, only a few of them were actual merchants. These stalls would hold many items, including herbal medicine, monster cores, and even toys for children. Yet the majority of the monster cores sold here were Class 1 ones, with Class 2 cores rarely showing up. Because of this, Jian Chun did not have much of an interest in this. There were many magical beasts within the continent, but if a mercenary were to sell a monster core through a merchant, they would only get 70% of market price. Because of this, many mercenaries would rather sell the items themselves since monster cores were always in high demand on the Tianyuan continent anyways. Even then, many people would still hire mercenaries to go and kill magical beasts instead of going themselves. As Jian Chun enjoyed his leisurely walk, the azure and violet glow within his dantian began to pulse so wildly that it began to impact both his dantian and his body. Before, His dantian was like a still lake with not even a single ripple. But now, the lake had become a raging sea with waves threatening to drown anything in its path. Even with the use of his saint force, Jianchen was unable to control this storm. Jianchen's face changed as he realized that the azure and violet glow was no longer controllable. This was the worst-case scenario Jianchen was afraid of. Although the two glows would generally float around within his dantian and take the majority of the energy within the monster cores, Jianchen knew that sooner or later, these two glows would bring about a huge amount of trouble for him. And it seems that today was finally the day that the azure and violet glow would no longer stay peacefully within him. Chapter 107. The strange white stone within Jianchen's dantian. The azure and violet glows were constantly flickering as they revolved around each other in a circle and emitted a bright light that could be seen by the naked eye. At the same time, he felt a strange sensation within his head as the azure and violet glows started to move, as if they had a will of their own and possessed their own independent mind and life. To Jianchen, it was almost as if the two glows were in a joyous mood. That's right. The feeling Jianchen had felt was as if the azure and violet glows in his dantian were experiencing a great amount of joy and excitement. But Jianchen was dumbfounded by this unbelievable conclusion. Even the look on Jianchen's face could show the amount of disbelief he had. At the same time, another strange sensation entered Jianchen's mind, as if it came in out of thin air. From this sensation, Jianchen realized that the two glows in his dantian had established some sort of subtle connection with an unknown thing. It was akin to a spiritual connection, but simultaneously, it also felt as if something was being locked away. Trying to restrain his emotions, Jianchen took a deep breath and slowly turned his head towards where the sensation was at its strongest. His eyes landed upon a street stall, where a 30-year-old man was managing. In his stall was a pile of Class 1 monster cores, and a few fantastic yet bizarre items. Jianchen's eyes swept past the items one by one until it landed upon a fist-sized white stone. It was in a particularly peculiar shape, and was completely white. But other than that, it was unremarkable. Compared to other white stones, this one didn't seem to be any different. Thanks to the unfathomable mystery that was the strange sensation, Jianchen knew that it was this white stone that was causing such a stir within his dantian. The glows had some sort of a connection with this locked white stone, like a child would try to protect his most favorite treasure. The feeling of happiness was so strong. Even Jianchen was experiencing the sensation to a degree. On the surface, Jianchen's expression didn't change at all, but the moment he reached the street stall, his hand reached out to grab the fist-sized white stone. But the moment his hand was about to pick it up, his face changed and let loose a surprised expression. It was because this fist-sized white stone was surprisingly heavy. The moment his hand made contact with it, the white stone did not move even a single centimeter. What a heavy stone! Jianchen couldn't help but to exclaim. Using his entire hand to clasp the stone firmly into his hand, he began to exert even more energy, and finally, the stone began to slowly rise from the table. Honored customer, are you looking at this strange stone? The stall owner suddenly appeared next to Jianchen with a smile. Jianchen slowly brought the fist-sized stone to his attention and stared at it. While it was only the size of a fist, it had already reached a weight of over 50 kilograms. If it were not for the fact that Jianchen was a middle-grade saint, picking up this stone in one hand would have been a strenuous task. But when he picked up the strange white stone, he could clearly sense the excitement and happiness emanating from within his dantian. However, Jianchen was skeptical of this sensation, because only beings that were given life would be able to experience these types of emotions. And yet, the two glows within his dantian were clearly giving off this sensation. So could it be that the azure and violet glow in his dantian actually had self-awareness? Perhaps they already had the ability to think for themselves. When Jianchen reached this line of thought, his entire body shook, and his forehead began to drip with sweat, as he began to feel like he had no control over his fate now. He couldn't help but sigh as he thought about his dantian problem. There was truly no way out of this problem. He had no idea or method in regards to the two glows in his dantian, as they were out of his control. Even if Jian Chun wanted those two glows gone from his dantian, there would be no way for him to accomplish it. AI, this is a blessing, not a curse, but also a curse I cannot escape from. It's best to forget about it since I've died once before. What else is there to care about? At worst, I'll just die again, Jian Chun said to himself. Continuing to look at the white stone in his hand, he thought about his dantian even more. The texture of this white stone was exceptionally unique. No matter how much Jian Chun looked at it, he wasn't able to tell if it was made out of stone or fine iron, as not only was it heavy, but its density was beyond normal. Sending his internal saint force through his arm, Jian Chun tried to have it enter the white stone, only to feel a strong resistance the moment the saint force made contact with it. It was as if the white stone was a defensive fort, and his saint force, the invader, wasn't able to make a dent in its defenses. The density of the white stone was extremely high, to the point that even Jian Chun was unable to use his saint force to enter it. Jian Chun tore his eyes away from the white stone, and looked at the stall owner and asked, I don't know what kind of stone this is, but what uses are there for it? Hearing Jian Chun's question, the stall owner laughed in an embarrassed way. Honored customer, to be truthful, even I don't know what this white stone is. Whatever it is used for, I don't know the answer to that either. But it is unusually heavy, so just after one look at it, one can tell that this white stone is no ordinary plaything. Then where did you find such a thing like this? Jian Chun's eyes shone as he continued to ask. Furrowing his eyebrows, the stall owner began to ponder the question before saying, Honored customer, I've been asked that same question many times, but I've never told them. However, you seem quite favorable to me, so I'll tell you where I found this. The stall owner's voice stopped as he pointed at the white stone. In all honesty, this white stone was found by me in the magical Beast Mountain range. Oh, hearing this answer, Jian Chun's eyes went back to the white stone once more. When he heard that the stall owner had picked up this item at the magical Beast Mountain range, it wasn't of any surprise to him. After all, there was always an opportunity anywhere for anyone. Even a farmer could stumble upon gold or another precious mineral while digging his farm. The stall owner looked at the interested face of Jian Chun and opened his mouth once more. Honored customer, this white stone has been in my possession for many years now. If it were not for the fact that I am in need of money, then I wouldn't have put it out on display in the first place. Seeing you are quite interested in it, why don't you buy it? Jian Chun looked at the white stone with one eye as he sized it up before looking back to the stall owner. How much is this white stone? His tone was especially flat. This white stone's very existence had caused many questions for him, so it was only right for him to buy it. Chapter 108. How much is it? This is. Seeing the expression on Jian Chun's face, the stall owner had a look of hesitation. Although he knew that this white stone was not an ordinary item by any means, he still didn't know what use it had. In order to understand the history behind this white stone, he had dove into multiple books about ancient treasures, but found nothing. He had even asked many close friends only to come up empty-handed. So after thinking it over, he had finally set a concrete price for this white stone. It was a shame that on this Tianyuan continent, there weren't many people that knew about this strange white stone, nor did anyone ever show this much curiosity toward it. But for those who were still curious enough to buy it, the moment they heard the price, every single person had put down the stone and immediately left. For while the stall owner knew this stone wasn't regular, he didn't know its use, but he still wanted to sell it for a decent price. So the moment everyone heard his price for the stone, they didn't hesitate to drop the stone and forget about it. When Jian Chun had asked about the price for this white stone, the stall owner felt undecided once more. He was really in need of money right now, so it could be said that this white stone was his sole way of earning money. If he set the price too high, then he was afraid that this Jian Chun would drop the stone and walk away like the other customers. But if he set the price too low, then he would feel uneasy in his heart. So with the price in question, his heart and mind were in contradiction with each other, and didn't know what price to give. After hesitating, the stall owner opened his mouth. "Honored customer, if you are really interested in this white stone, then please state your price for it." Hearing this, Jianchen looked at the man with an amused smile. "This is obviously your item, so it's only right for the price to be decided by you. Why would you want me to name a price?" The stall owner became embarrassed as he listened to Jianchen and laughed awkwardly. "Honored customer, it isn't that I'm unwilling to say the price. Rather, it's because I'm afraid that if I say a price, you'll be scared away. I've had many people express their interest in this white stone, but the moment they heard my price, they all put it down and left." "Oh, then how much do you think this white stone is worth?" Jianchen asked with interest. He was already completely determined to buy this white stone regardless of the price or the true use of it. If it could provoke such a strong reaction from the azure and violet glow in his dantian, then this was no ordinary item. He couldn't say for sure, but this white stone could possibly solve the mystery about his dantian problems. So for that reason, Jianchen was very determined to win this object. The stall owner bit his lip as he looked at Jianchen. "Honored customer, if you are this adamant in buying the white stone, then I shall tell you the price. Look here, will this much do?" With that said, the stall owner held out 5 fingers on his hand, as if to give Jianchen a high five. Seeing this movement, Jianchen couldn't help but have a joking expression on his face as he said uncertainly, "Could it be you're selling this for 50 gold coins?" Hearing this, the stall owner grew red in the face from the paltry amount, as if the amount Jianchen had offered differed from his by thousands of coins. The stall owner sighed and spoke. "Honored customer, I will be straightforward with you and be clear. I want to sell this stone for 500 purple coins. Do you still want it?" As he spoke, the stall owner's eyes stared at Jianchen closely. "What? 500 purple coins? Are you joking?" Jianchen cried out in shock as he looked at the stall owner in disbelief. The moment he had heard the words purple coin, Jianchen's lips felt especially heavy. 500 purple coins was equivalent to 50,000 gold coins. The stall owner's face grew even redder as he understood the look on Jianchen's face. He knew that 500 purple coins was a price that would not have any buyers. That is, honored customer, if you can offer up a price that I can agree to, then at the very least I can sell it to you," the stall owner said in an agonized tone. With this, Jianchen sucked in a deep breath as he sized up the white stone in his hand with uncertainty. After a long time, Jianchen finally made up his mind. "My highest price will be 100 purple coins. Whether I buy it or not, it's up to you." With that, he stared at the stall owner with a heavy glance, but even he was quite nervous within his heart. Jianchen was determined to get this white stone. If he could easily buy it here, then it would be for the best. Even then, 100 purple coins was not a small amount at all for a stall owner. Jianchen had already seen what this 30-year-old stall owner was like. Since the stall owner had such a shrewd mind, there was no way Jianchen could reveal how interested he was in the white stone. Otherwise, if the stall owner found out how much he wanted it, who knew how high the price would go up? Not only that, but Jianchen wasn't willing to let others know how much money he had on him. If it was found out, then those with sinister purposes would possibly come track him down looking for trouble. Although with his strength, he wasn't even afraid of enemies at the Saint Master level. But he wanted to avoid as much trouble as he possibly could. The moment the stall owner heard Jianchen's offer of 100 purple coins, he grew happy but then immediately grew embarrassed. "Honored customer, could you possibly add a little more to that?" Jianchen chuckled as he shook his head. Seeing the happy glint in the stall owner's eyes, Jianchen understood what the man was thinking of. Seeing how Jianchen wasn't going to go any higher with his price, the man looked a little disappointed. But after thinking it over while biting his lips, he nodded his head. "Okay, 100 purple coins it is. We have a deal." Taking out the 100 purple coins from within his space belt, Jianchen slowly counted them out for the stall owner, and then took the white stone for himself to store into his space belt before departing from the stall. Jianchen had really wanted to study this strange white stone and its purpose, but in this busy street where people flowed like water in a river, this was not the best place for it. However, as Jianchen left the area, two people had noticed him. These two people both looked to be 20 years old, and both had a weak stature. Xiao-san, it looks as if we've stumbled across an easy target. The shriveled youth on the left watched Jianchen leave the area, as he spoke with an excited voice. The one called Xiao-san nodded their head. Right, that person doesn't seem too old, so his strength should be quite weak. Since he's also by himself, this is a good opportunity. Seeing him grab that many purple coins, I'm willing to bet that that person will have more on him. Huang Ho-er, you go follow him while I go notify the rest. With that, Xiao-san quickly disappeared into the crowd while Huang Ho-er began to follow Jianchen. Chapter 109. Robbery encounter. Jianchen continued to walk down the street after purchasing the white stone. Right now Jianchen wasn't all that focused on researching the white stone. Instead, he was lazily strolling around the street, just in case he would be lucky enough to find another treasure. However, what was strange for Jianchen was that after he had bought the white stone, the azure and violet glow in his dantian had already calmed down. Although, Jianchen no longer cared about the matter anymore, and only wanted nighttime to come, so that he could study the white stone. If he was lucky, he would be able to make a discovery and figure out how to solve the problem with his dantian. If he could resolve the problem with his dantian, then his cultivation rate would improve without any more problems. Although the azure and violet glows were constantly taking a huge amount of his cultivation, they had allowed Jianchen to absorb the energy from the monster cores without being affected by the berserk element within them. His consumption rate was still far too large, and Jianchen was worried about his cultivation. If it were up to him, Jianchen would rather have his original cultivation speed. Even if he could no longer easily handle the berserk element in the monster cores, he would find a way to deal with them. He did not want a situation that he could not control, because to Jianchen, the azure and violet glow was like a ticking time bomb. They could go off at any time, and although he would have a slower cultivation rate, he wouldn't need to worry about getting more monster cores every single day. Plus, the amount of energy he would absorb from the monster core would be more than the amount he was currently absorbing. A Class 3 monster core was already enough to support his cultivation for several days. It could even last him dozens of days before all of the energy was consumed. In that case, as long as Jianchen spent an entire day hunting magical beasts or monster cores, it was enough for him to train for several months. As the amount of time spent on hunting magical beasts decreased, the amount of time spent on cultivating would increase. Based on his calculations, even if the azure and violet glows in his dantian were removed, they wouldn't have much of an impact on Jianchen's overall cultivation speed. Jianchen wandered around the busy streets aimlessly and stared at the various street stalls on the side. Occasionally he would walk into a random store and take a look around. After discovering this strange white stone, Jianchen was now curious if he could find any other fantastical things while traveling up and down the market street. Perhaps if he was lucky, he would find yet another object that would stir attention within his dantian. It was unfortunate that while he was walking on the market, he did not see anything else of value. It seems that these items cannot be found so easily. Jianchen sighed with disappointment. Seeing how the sky was already getting dark, he had lost interest in trying to find anything new. Jianchen stared off in the distance as he gave a grim smile. Right now there's not enough time. After I take care of the people behind me, I'll go rest up at a restaurant. Then tomorrow I'll head out with everyone toward the magical beast mountain range. As he said that, Jianchen looked around himself for a less populated alleyway to walk through. Afterward, Jianchen walked through the alleyway slowly, almost as if he was still window shopping. Just the road he was now traveling on was a more isolated path, where less people traveled. Once more crossing into another secluded alleyway, Jianchen finally ended up in a completely isolated lane with a dead end that was 4 meters tall. Stopping where he stood, Jianchen turned around to be greeted with an empty road. With a look of disdain he spoke evenly. "Friends, you've walked so far with me already, could it be you're still unwilling to show yourself?" Not long after Jianchen had spoke, a group of people walked out into the secluded lane. There was a dozen people around, with each person's age ranging from 20 to 30 years old. The oldest one of them looked to be around 40 years old. The moment the dozen people appeared, they began to spread out in formation and blocked up the entire width of the alley. Clearly, they didn't want to let Jian Chen leave the alley, but they didn't stop there. As they blocked up the alley, each person began to slowly walk toward Jian Chen while giving him an intense stare, making them look like fiends. Jian Chen could only smile as he watched the people approach. To him, these people were not fiendish looking at all. He could tell how strong they were with his spirit, so the exact strength of each of the people here was clear to him. Among the group, the weakest members hadn't even reached the saint level, while 3 other members were at the great saint level. The biggest surprise was that the oldest member there was unexpectedly at the saint master level. Even the captain of the flame mercenaries, Captain Kendall, was weaker than this person by a single tier. This man was a middle saint master. This man was around 40 years old and wore a bluish-green robe. He had an exceptionally fierce expression on his face with his short hair swaying in the wind slightly. Right under his mouth was a large beard that was very predominant. Dear friends, after walking so far down the path with this one has to wonder what you are doing, Jian Chen said with a trace of a smile, but his tone was still flat. The eldest male with the power of a middle saint master stared fiercely at Jian Chen and growled, "So you knew we were here all along?" Jian Chen crossed his arms in front of his chest with a smile. "Of course. You were following me so adamantly while traveling on the same road for so long. How would a person not notice?" Hearing Jian Chen, the elder man looked at Jian Chen with a sudden look of realization. "So it was like this. It would appear that we were too careless then." Then the man's face changed as his surprised look suddenly grew cold. "Kid, right now this road has been blocked by us. If you don't want to die, then hand over every single coin and item within your space belt. Otherwise, prepare yourself to die here. If you want the things within my possession, then let's see if you have the strength to do so," Jian Chen said impassively. However, with each passing word, his tone grew colder and colder. With that said, the elder man didn't bother to say anything else, and instead waved his hand. "Everyone forward. Bring him down, and whatever he has will be ours." The entire formation began to rush toward Jian Chen, as they each brought out their saint weapons. For those who hadn't yet reached the saint level, there was a simple iron sword and shield in their hands as they charged fearlessly at him. Seeing the dozen people approach, Jian Chen sneered in disdain. Right as they got within 10 meters of him, he leapt into the air as if swallowed up by the sky. Both of his legs kicked off of the walls with an impressive amount of strength, as he flew over the heads of the people below. As he flew toward the 40-year-old man, a familiar silver-colored sword appeared in his right hand, as it then transformed into a silver streak of lightning. With a speed that was difficult for the naked eye to see, the sword stabbed at the middle-aged man's throat. After countless of improvements to his body, Jian Chen's body was relentlessly refined by the special properties of the Saint Force. So now his strength was far stronger than his previous life thanks to that same Saint Force, and even his speed had increased many times over. Even with such an ordinary-looking sword, its speed was so fast that even for a great saint it was hard to dodge. After all, if one wanted to increase their attack speed, they would need to use their Saint Force to enhance it, but this was a hard strain on the physical body. So thanks to Jian Chen's special body and fast swordplay, it was a better improvement to his previous life. Even compared to those on the Tianyuan continent, aside from those who were stronger than Jian Chen, he was able to bypass the defenses of anyone at his strength level or below. If Jian Chen were to use his entire strength in his attacks, then no one at his level of strength would have an opportunity to retaliate and would have their throats stabbed before they knew it. Seeing Jian Chen charge at him so fiercely, the middle-aged man let out a sneer as he brought the huge axe up into the air. With both hands clasping the handle, a great amount of Saint Force was constantly flowing into his Saint weapon as he cried out loud, and then chopped down at Jian Chen with all his might. Ding! The light wind sword and the axe made contact with each other, causing a large explosion to take place. Following the sound, a large vibration was inflicted onto the man with an intensity so strong, it had caused his legs to weaken and stumble back a step or two. His eyes widened in astonishment as he stared disbelievingly at his opponent. This was because the man at first did not take Jian Chen's actions seriously. To him, Jian Chen was no more than a 20-year-old man, who would possibly only have the strength of a saint at the most. Even if he was a genius, then he would be no higher than a primary great saint. So as far as he was concerned, a person like this was no match for his troops. After this exchange of blows, the man was shocked at this new discovery. Even though he hadn't placed too low of an importance on Jian Chen, this strength of his was far beyond his expectations. With this strength, the man estimated that Jian Chen was no weaker than he was. Jian Chen did a somersault in midair as he descended back down onto the ground. Dispersing the shock from the initial blow with ease, he didn't take a pause even after landing on the ground. Immediately charging toward the elder person once more, the light wind sword in his hand emitted a hazy glow of light that wrapped the entirety of the blade. To the naked eye, the sword looked as if it was a hazy silver ray of light as it shot toward the man's throat with a ridiculous speed. Chapter 110. Traveling to the Magical Beast Mountain Range. Good approach, the 40-year-old man shouted, while brandishing his saint weapon without the slightest trace of fear. His face grew solemn as he slashed at Jian Chen. Ding ding ding! The previously quiet alley suddenly grew loud with the sounds of saint weapons clashing with each other, as Jian Chen and the elderly man continued to battle it out between them. Even though he was a middle great saint fighting against a middle saint master, he had not yet fallen despite it being a fierce battle. Jian Chen was exceptionally nimble as he moved around his opponent like a demon. The light wind sword in his hand relentlessly flashed toward the man's larynx, and each time the man's axe blocked his strikes. From the start, Jian Chen's attacks were like tidal waves of blows that left almost no chance for the man to retaliate. But gradually, the tidal wave of blows had slowly evolved into a fierce storm of blades that caused the man to not have any opportunities to retaliate. To be accurate, it wasn't that the man was unable to retaliate. In actuality, it was that if he were to try to strike back, then he was afraid that his attack would miss Jian Chen, and he would get a sword through his throat for his troubles. The man's entire forehead was now dripping with perspiration as he continued to fight. He didn't think that this seemingly 20-year-old male would possess such a strong amount of strength at the middle saint level. Not only was he narrowly dodging the blows as is, but what made the man afraid the most was that this youth's sword play was far too quick. Not only was his speed fast enough to make anyone astonished, the amount of times he could strike was intimidating as well. Right now, there was a large amount of regret within the 40-year-old man's heart. If he had known about Jian Chen's strength earlier, then he wouldn't have come over to try and rob him. On the side of the alleyway, the other people stared sluggishly at the fierce battle between Jian Chen and their boss. Just like the other man, no one had thought that Jian Chen, who looked to be much younger than they were, would be able to contend against their boss in terms of strength. Despite having a dozen people, when they looked at this fight, they all knew that they would not be able to join in. If they were to rashly charge in, all they would accomplish would be a vain death. Even though they had 3 great saints, but even with the strength of the great saints, they were painfully aware that their boss was in a disadvantageous position thanks to Jian Chen's display of power. Since he could only block now, it could be said that the boss life could be taken at any moment without trouble, and if they were to charge in, then they would be of no use. All of them knew that death would be the only thing awaiting them since they knew that their speed was not enough to dodge the lightning-quick sword that belongs to Jian Chen. Jian Chen and the middle-aged man once again fought to another standstill, but the middle-aged man was still in a bad position. Jian Chen stared at the man impassively as his right arm lashed out, transforming the light wind sword into a ray of silver light that streaked toward the man's throat once more. In a flash, the sword approached the man's throat. In the history of their battle so far, this was the fastest sword stroke he had displayed. The middle-aged man's face lost all shades of color and fright. Against a sword as fast as this, he practically had lost any chance of dodging or blocking this movement. In the eyes of the 40-year-old man, this sword had already reached an inconceivable amount of speed and could no longer be dodged by someone like him. So in an instant, the man's face had become deathly pale. But at the moment where his death was about to come to pass, the sword had reached the skin of his throat and stopped its momentum suddenly. At such a crucial moment like this, the light-wind sword had stopped its forward thrust, only allowing the tip of the blade to touch the man's throat. Despite the tip of the light-wind sword stopping at the skin of his throat, the man had suddenly felt that it was becoming extremely difficult to breathe. At the same time, he was feeling a very sharp point of pain from where the tip was touching against his throat, almost as if the sword had already pierced his throat. The middle-aged man stood lifelessly where he was. At this point, he was completely terrified of moving. He was afraid that if he were to make the slightest movement, Jian Chun would then relentlessly plunge his sword into his neck. So right now, the man's face was dripping with cold sweat. SW swore. "Swordsman, please spare my life. Next time, this lowly one won't bother swordsman ever again." The man's words were filled with terror for Jian Chun, each word barely coming out stronger than a stutter. Right now, his life was at the mercy of Jian Chun, so the thought of having no face toward someone as young as Jian Chun wasn't a problem for him. To him, as long as he could keep his life, then even kneeling toward Jian Chun wouldn't be an impossible task. Jian Chun stared at the middle-aged man with a small sneer. Slowly bringing back his sword, he said emotionlessly, "My mood today is quite good, so I do not have a desire to kill anyone. You better behave yourself in the future, and not let me catch you doing something like this." With the magical beast mountain range being so close by, and your strength being decent enough, a few low-leveled magical beasts would be well in your capability to earn money. With that said, Jian Chun left the alleyway. Yes, we will definitely comply with Swordsman's command. We will never do such a thing again." The middle-aged man said frantically. It was almost as if the man was completely compliant with Jian Chun's orders. The moment Jian Chun's shadow left the alleyway, the middle-aged man let out a long breath of air and wiped his forehead clean of his sweat. Thinking back to that fight of life or death for him, the man was absolutely terrified out of his wits. In that recent moment, his entire life was hanging by a thread, ready to be severed. Leaving the alleyway, Jian Chun cut back into the busy roads before walking into a nearby restaurant. During the night, Jian Chun sat down on his bed and began to study the white stone in his possession. What exactly is this item? It looks like a stone, but the material it's made from isn't like a stone at all. One could say it's made of iron, but at the same time, one cannot say that. Staring at the white stone in his hand, Jian Chun was full of doubt and misgivings about it. From the start, it was because of the azure and violet glow in his dantian that made him interested in this white stone. At the beginning, it was the azure and violet glow that had initially felt happy and excited, but the moment after he had bought the white stone, his dantian had once more reverted back to its quiet state. Even with the white stone in the palm of his hand, the twin glows were not at all attracted to it in any way now. Jian Chun himself did not have the slightest understanding of the history behind this white stone. Although he had the expansive library from Kargath Academy as his source of knowledge, he still did not have a single piece of information about it. Restlessly, Jian Chun continued to study the white stone for the rest of the day. Aside from knowing that this stone was exceptionally solid, there wasn't any other piece of information he could glean from it. Whether he used water to boil it or fire to burn it, the white stone didn't have a single reaction or change. With no other choice, Jian Chun stuffed the white stone back into his space belt. Observing the glows in his dantian once more, he noticed that it was as peaceful as ever, not having any of the previous excitement shown earlier in the day. While the two glows were housed within Jian Chun's dantian, he was completely unable to do anything about the two. He couldn't get up close with the dantian, and could only observe these mysterious things from afar. If he got any closer, then he would suffer a strong feedback that he couldn't yet break through. So for that reason, Jian Chen had decided that trying to get any closer to them in his dantian would be a forbidden action. AI. Jian Chen sighed. Once he had come to this conclusion, he didn't know if this was a blessing or a curse. That night, Jian Chen was not cultivating for once. Instead, he was sleeping in his bed. For the first time in 3 months since he had left Jessen Kingdom, this would be the first night he would be able to sleep. Sleeping was a good way to restore his spirit, and with his large amount of spirit, if he were to refrain from using the spirit sword or control the light saint force, then it would be possible for him to go for a few days and nights without sleep. Not only that, but if he were to cultivate, then his spirit would be slowly recovered. So for that reason, Jian Chen hadn't slept at all since there was no need for him to. The next morning, Jian Chen woke up and looked outside to see the early morning scenery. Taking in a fresh breath of morning air, he sighed. I haven't slept in months, so I nearly forgot how good sleeping was. Now that I have slept again, it really was very comfortable. Soon after, Jian Chen left the restaurant and rode a horse toward where Kendall was waiting for everyone. The flame mercenaries were again staying over at the same house as before. At that moment, 8 members of the flame mercenaries were still resting inside. Although they were a small mercenary group, they didn't have the funds to build a bigger house, so at the very least they could only afford a small house. Arriving at the house, Jian Chen tied his horse to a fixed fence post and prepared to knock on the door. Before he could knock, a weak-looking youth suddenly opened the door. The moment he saw Jian Chen, his eyes loosened in intensity as he backed away from the door. This was the second youngest member of the mercenary group, Xiao Dao. Jian Chen gave a small smile and said, Xiao Dao, are you planning to go out? Xiao Dao chuckled. I only just heard the sounds of a horse, so I thought it was you for sure. Opening the door, I see that I was right. Come in, Jian Chen. Everyone's already waiting for you. Chapter 111. Peaceful at last. Just as Jian Chen entered the house, he saw Captain Kendall sitting with the other members eating breakfast. On the table was a huge steaming plate of beef. Jian Chen, come and eat. Today we shall be hunting, so you need to eat your fill, so that you can be full of energy when you're fighting against the magical beasts. Kendall motioned for Jian Chen to sit down next to him at the long table. Hoopa tore a piece of beef off and began to chew it. That's right. Today we must eat until our stomachs are full. If we come across a strong magical beast, if we can't kill it, we can at least run away. Kendall looked at Hoopa with a disapproving look. Hoopa, do you really want us to come across a magical beast we cannot defeat? If we come across a Class 4 magical beast that specializes in speed, then the lives of our group will be forfeited to the Magic Beast Mountain Range. Kendall, I'm not just full of hot air. We have to take this seriously, I know. While Class 4 magical beasts scare me, we aren't going to the depths of the Magical Beast Mountain Range, so we won't be seeing any Class 4 magical beasts there. Hoopa said. Sitting down on the table, Jian Chen took a piece of beef and chewed it with his mouth. Uncle Kendall, what Hoopa said isn't wrong. Class 4 magical beasts are generally within the depths of the mountain range. As long as we don't go too far in, then we won't see any. Jian Chen had spent a decent amount of time there, so he was familiar with the environment there. Something like that can't be guaranteed. Kendall's face grew serious as he looked around the table. Even though we're only going to be around the outskirts of the mountain range, no one should drop their guard. While the majority of Class 4 magical beasts reside in the depths of the mountain range, there are still a few exceptions. A few bored Class 4 magical beasts could chase a few weaker ones to the outskirts of the mountain range. Something like this can happen on the Tianyuan continent. This is not a rare occurrence. It has happened many times before. Jian Chen nodded his head at this. He agreed with Captain Kendall's words, because he had read many times in books that strong magical beasts would occasionally come out of their usual place as a result of boredom. However, this didn't happen enough for it to be extremely probable. In Jian Chen's time in the Magical Beast Mountain Range, he had never met a Class 4 magical beast while on the outskirts of the mountain range, and even Class 3 magical beasts were rare there. This piece of information is something we all know. And while we haven't yet come across such an event, some others have. Alright, Kendall, stop talking about it. It makes everyone's heart feel heavy. If we really come across such an event, then it'll be our bad luck. Let's just eat for now and then hit the road. The next one to speak was the one who wasn't that much younger than Captain Kendall, as well as being one of the strongest mercenaries in the group, Deer. With the strength of a peak great saint, he was already close to becoming a saint master. The moment Deer spoke, everyone became calm once more, and resumed eating from the plate of beef. In a flash, the platter of beef had quickly been wiped clean, leaving behind only bits and pieces. After the food was finished, everyone immediately set out on the road. Within their group of 10, only Jianchen was riding on horseback, while everyone else walked on foot. Jianchen, when we get to the Magical Beast Mountain Range, what will you do about your horse? You can't possibly bring the horse in there. Kendall asked Jianchen. Hearing Kendall, Jianchen began to laugh, as he patted the white mane of his horse. There's still 20 kilometers until we arrive at the mountain range. When we get there, I'll let the horse go. Xiao Dao immediately bounded forward when he heard what Jianchen said and cried out. That can't be, Jianchen. Could it be you want to let the horse go free? You're wasting such a large amount of money. Jianchen could only laugh and say, if I'm letting it go, then why not let it have its freedom? On such a large continent, whether or not it can survive, it'll be up to its luck. Horses were the most common of animals on the continent, as well as the most inferior and abundant type of transportation. Wild animals were also able to absorb the world essence and eat a few treasures to become magical beasts. Even these horses had the ability to become one. Jianchen had once read that 100 years ago, there was a horse with the strength of a Class 5 magical beast. However, its potential was limited, and its innate ability was lacking. Advancing in strength for them was a difficult path as well as a long one. Even though most of the people were walking on foot, the journey was progressing quickly. After 2 hours of traveling, everyone had finally reached the foot of the Magical Beast Mountain Range. Seeing the verdant plant life in front of him, Jianchen disembarked from his horse and headed into the forest along with the group. The white horse stayed behind, but Jianchen knew that after a while, it would leave by itself. From here on out, be careful, everyone. Although the forests here have more wild animals than magical beasts, that doesn't mean we can drop our guards. Captain Kendall looked at everyone solemnly before continuing to say, Dear, Hu Po and I will walk in front of the group. Zhou Dekai, Zhou Xiaokai and Chang Ningfeng will walk behind the group. The rest will be in between us 6. After that, the group maintained the position ordered by Kendall and moved onward. On the road, although many wild animals had attacked them, their strength was incomparable to the Class 1 magical beasts, who were also not a threat to their group. After 6 hours, the flame mercenaries finally reached the other side of the forest and entered the outskirts of the Magical Beast Mountain Range, where the Class 1 magical beasts resided. Captain Kendall, who was walking ahead of the group, twisted his head back and said to everyone, Everyone prepare yourself to fight. From here on out, Class 1 and 2 magical beasts will be roaming around. However, even before Captain Kendall had warned everyone but Jianchen had already long since prepared themselves for battle and stared around themselves intensely. The group continued to walk into the outskirts of the mountain range, but after walking for 4 hours, they had not seen a single magical beast. Within the group, Jianchen continued to walk with his eyes flickering with indifference. With each step he took, he was already aware of every finite detail of the magical beast's activity around them. However, whenever a magical beast was hiding in the tall bushes 10 meters away from them, they would retreat. Not a single one would dare attack them, leaving Jianchen to be perplexed beyond belief on why they were doing that. Could it be that the magical beasts have realized the strength of our group and don't want to die? Jianchen's eyebrows furrowed together as he thought to himself. When he had been in the Magical Beast Mountain Range before, he had never come across such behavior. Unable to take it anymore, Jianchen asked, Uncle Kendall, do you not feel as if something is wrong? Jianchen's question had been heard by the sensitive ears of everyone in the group. The entire group turned around to look at him as Kendall asked, Jianchen, what exactly is wrong here? Jianchen hesitated for a moment before saying, this place is where Class 1 magical beasts roam about. So why is it we have not come across a single one yet? Upon hearing this, everyone let loose a relieved breath of air. They had thought that Jianchen actually had something in mind that was related to an unfavorable event. Kendall laughed and said, Jianchen, this is actually very common. Although this is the roaming grounds for Class 1 magical beasts, but the magical beast mountain range is vast, and this is only just one of the many roads. Not coming across a magical beast isn't rare. Every single time we've entered here in the past it has been like this. Jianchen's eyebrows furrowed together even more. In his heart, he knew that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. Captain Kendall, could it be that you've never come across a Class 1 magical beast yet? Jianchen asked. It's not that, we just merely don't see one often. The majority of the beasts that appear are Class 2 and 3. Of course, there are times where we don't see a single Class 1 magical beast at all. He answered Jianchen's questions patiently. Captain Kendall, then on average, how many monster cores do you usually get? Jianchen asked. Not too few. Captain Kendall thought about it before saying. On average, we can get 4 or 5 Class 2 monster cores in a single day, and maybe 6 or 7 if our luck is good. Class 3 monster cores will be less since Class 3 magical beasts don't roam around here as often. So the chances of seeing one are slim, and since Class 3 magical beasts are hard to kill as well, it'll be difficult for us to avoid any injuries. For that reason, if we come across any Class 3 magical beast, we try not to provoke it. Kendall paused for a moment before saying, when Deer makes a breakthrough to a Saint Master, then with our combined strength, it will be easy to kill a Class 3 magical beast. However, until Deer becomes a Saint Master, we need to do our best and avoid Class 3 magical beasts. Although Class 3 monster cores sell for a higher price than Class 2 monster cores, I don't wish to see any casualties. If we get a little bit more money in exchange for our lives, what use would that be? Chapter 112. Fighting the Black Tiger. Hearing Captain Kendall, Jianchen nodded his head in approval. His impression of Kendall had once more grown. The evil in Kendall's heart was no more than Jianchen's own in his previous life. With a selfless attitude like that, no person would refuse to lay down their lives for such a captain. Most importantly, with the captain's strength of a primary Saint Master, although he couldn't kill a Class 3 magical beast by himself, he could at least give Class 2 magical beasts a hard time. It was a shame that he didn't fight Class 2 magical beasts by himself. If he did, his profits would be much higher. To join with saints and great saints to hunt and kill magical beasts, although the profit distribution was merit-based, his own profits would still be many times smaller than going solo. In fact, the difference would be so huge that it wouldn't even be half the amount of what he could get by himself. With hearing just this bit, Jianchen truly admired Captain Kendall. However, when it came to Captain Kendall and the amount of profit they earned in the magical beast forest in the past, he was shocked into silence. With the captain being of the Saint Master level, and 5 other members being great saints, it was truly a pathetic amount of monster cores that they earned. Jianchen just couldn't believe it. When he had gone solo within the magical beast mountain range, in the span of a day, he had collected at least 20 Class 2 magical beast cores. Even Class 3 monster cores had numbered around a dozen. Compared to what the Flame Mercenaries got, the difference between the two truly could not be compared. At that moment, Jianchen's ear trembled slightly as he turned his head to look at the tall grass nearby. Inside, he could sense the movement of a magical beast moving about from 10 meters away. However, this magical beast was barely making any movements, so even Captain Kendall wasn't able to detect its presence. The magical beast paused for a moment, as if it were hesitating before it decided if it wanted to attack the group Jianchen was in. In the end, it silently retreated. Sensing the magical beast's retreat, Jianchen's mind was filled with doubt. What's happening? Could it be that the magical beasts have recognized the strength of our group and realized that its own strength was only enough to send itself to its death? Jianchen wondered, but as he thought about that, another question came into his mind. With the magical beast being so low in strength, how could it possibly have the knowledge to make such a decision? When Jianchen had traveled to the magical beast mountain range, no matter if it was a class 1 or 2 magical beast, or even a class 3 magical beast, they would scurry out of their hiding spots to attack him. Even if they were in a hidden area, they would try to make a sneak attack, making this situation a lot more different than what Jianchen was expecting. Just what is going on? Could it be our group has too many people in it? That could be why the magical beasts aren't attacking. Jianchen looked backward with a doubtful look. On this single road, he had only seen the traces of a single magical beast. At that moment, a black blur came rushing out of the tall grass toward Captain Kendall, who was at the front of the group. Everyone had already prepared themselves for this situation. So the moment the black blur came into view, it had already been spotted by Kendall and Deer. Looking at the incoming target, Kendall laughed and cried out. One finally came. A large axe sharp enough to cut the air around it appeared in his hand. With a fluid motion, the axe was swung in a downward motion toward the black blur. When Kendall had begun to attack, Deer stood behind him with his broadsword out and ready to swing. Ding! Kendall's axe and the black blur made contact in midair, creating a large explosion of sound. The black blur came to a grinding halt as the axe was sent recoiling backward. The black blur flew backwards into the air for 5 meters before landing back down on the ground. The moment it touched the ground, every single member of the group got to see what had just attacked them. It was a tiger whose mane was completely black. Both paws had many sharpened claws, while some of them had even looked to be stained with blood. Brothers, surround it, Kendall called out before grabbing his axe to once more attack the black tiger. Hu Pe, Chang Ningfeng, and the 2 Zhou twins encircled the black tiger in all 4 directions in order to prevent it from getting away. Deer, who had the power of a great saint, entered the circular ring and began to fight it with Kendall. This black tiger was only a class 2 magical beast, and with a saint master and a peak great saint fighting it, this black tiger didn't have a chance of surviving. In a flash, the black tiger's body was filled with wounds as blood flowed freely from it. As a result, its normally black body was dyed red. Jianchen, Xiao Dao and Yin Xian stood and watched the battle from afar. While the magical beast had a natural superiority in instincts, this was only a class 2 magical beast that was no match for a great saint. So for this battle, Xiao Dao and the other 2 saints were unable to intervene, without fear of risking a serious injury. Watching Kendall and Deer fight it out, Xiao Dao was very eager to join in on the fight. Observing the 2 fight with the black tiger, Xiao Dao looked as if he had wanted nothing more than to reincarnate into Kendall and fight against the black tiger for a countless number of rounds. I have to work hard and cultivate so that I can become a saint master quickly. This way, I can hunt and kill class 2 magical beasts by myself. Xiao Dao remarked as he bit his lips in determination. Hearing this, Yin Xian, who was standing by his side, laughed and said, Xiao Dao, your strength right now should be at the middle saint, so it's still far in the future until you become a saint master. With your cultivation talent, you should be around 40 years old before you become a saint master, if not older. 40 years old, so what? Didn't Captain become a saint master at that age? Either way, I'll eventually reach the saint master level. Xiao Dao replied in a slightly dissatisfied tone. With a yearning expression reflected in his gaze, he muttered, Wait until I gain the strength of a saint master. Then I can adventure around Magical Beast Mountain Range alone, and fight the magical beasts at close quarters one-on-one. It will be an impressive sight. Seeing Xiao Dao's expression of yearning, Yin Xian grudgingly shook his head and inwardly whispered to himself, Are saint masters that amazing? All they do is bully class 2 magical beasts. You think that a saint master's strength is enough for them to rampage around Magical Beast Mountain Range without fear? Yin Xian turned around to look at Jianchen as he said, Hey Jianchen, how many times have you entered Magical Beast Mountain Range? You're so small. Could it be that it's only your first time? Jianchen indifferently replied, This should be my second time. Although Jianchen had entered the forest at Kargath Academy and killed magical beasts there in the past, that experience couldn't possibly count formally. In addition, the magical beasts there had been raised by the academy, so Jianchen simply ignored that experience. Yinxian's eyes lit up. He immediately showed interest and impatiently asked, "Then how many people were with you when you first entered? How powerful were they? Did you have any experts as formidable as Kendall?" Jianchen turned around to Yinxian. After hesitating for a bit, he said, "The first time I entered the magical beast mountain range, I was alone. However," before Jianchen had even finished speaking, he was interrupted by Yunxian. "What, you entered magical beast mountain range alone your first time? Wow, Jianchen, I really look up to you." Jianchen bitterly smiled and replied, "Yunxian, there's no need to speak so loudly. When I had entered magical beast mountain range alone my first trip, I had only wandered around the surrounding areas." Yunxian looked at Jianchen with an expression of admiration and said, "Jianchen, I really respect you, especially your courage. You are really bold. Could it be that you didn't know that even the surrounding areas of magical beast mountain range are extremely dangerous? Encountering a class 1 magical beast is fine. If you can't beat it, there's still a chance to flee. But if you meet a class 2 magical beast, then your young life would be finished on the spot." Yunxian patted his chest, and he said with a trace of lingering fear, "However, a youngster like you is extremely fortunate to not have met such magical beasts. Otherwise, you most likely would have been doomed." "That's right, Jianchen. From now, you mustn't come to the magical beast mountain range alone. Although our journey so far has been very tranquil, you definitely cannot underestimate the magical beast forest just because of that," Xiao Dao said solemnly, his expression serious. Jianchen bitterly smiled at the two's words and replied, "All right, I understand. For now, let's just go back to watching Captain's fight with Black Tiger. Watching this scene is really beneficial for you guys. You can at least learn some battle patterns. They would be pretty useful later on." Kobold stood by Jianchen's side, his shocked gaze locked onto Jianchen. He surveyed Jianchen's body up and down a few times, and his eyes flashed brightly with an expression of indefinite bewilderment. However, he didn't say a word, and quietly stood there, motionless and silent. Hearing Jianchen's words, Xiao Dao and Yunxian really did stop talking, and returned their attention to the fight and concentrated on what was happening in front of them. Kendall and Deer continued to fight the Black Tiger for about the same amount of time it took for a cup of tea to be made. While the entire body of the Black Tiger was filled with wounds and blood, the combatants had finally brought out the true extent of the tiger's ferocity. With its life on the line, the Black Tiger's strength didn't falter at all, and began to dodge the moves of the humans nimbly. With each dodge, it tried to strike back at Kendall and Deer. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.